Yes, ma'am.
So,
You're
Madam Chair, I'll count you into it. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Go ahead, please.
Welcome to the Board of Education special board meeting. I would like to call the meeting to order. I would like to greet our virtual and in-person public forum guests. The guests who have signed up to speak virtually are in the waiting room and can hear and depend on their device see the meeting, except tonight we only have 2 guests and they're actually in person. When we get to the public forum agenda item, your name will be called in the order it was received. For the guests that are in the room, let's see, let me go down here. Please turn your cameras on. We don't need to do that because we've got people that are in the room and not virtually. So you may not yield your time to another speaker. Once your speaking time is finished, the virtual guests or the guests will be ushered back to the attending waiting room, and the in-person guests are asked to return to the seat. You may also choose to leave the meeting at that point and watch the YouTube live stream. At the end of the public forum segment, we will continue with tonight's agenda. And if you did not have a chance to say everything you would like to say, please email the board members at boarded@aps.edu or call us at 505-880-3729. So tonight we're using the closed captioning feature. The captioning will also be visible on the YouTube live stream. For those speaking during the meeting, please speak clearly so your closed captions are as accurate as possible. So we'll move on to Section A, which is Pledge of Allegiance, and a moment of silence. And would everyone in the boardroom please stand as you're able, and we'll recite the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Juro fidelidad a la bandera de los Estados Unidos de América y a la república que representa una nación bajo Dios, indivisible, con libertad y justicia para todos. Thank you. Will you join me in a moment of silence for all the APS students who have died serving their country? Thank you. That was definitely appropriate. We've just got through Memorial Day, so grateful that we do that. Ms. Yeager, may I have a roll call, please?
Peggy Mueller-Aragon.
Here.
Gonzalez.
Here.
Barbara Peterson.
Here.
Crystal Tapia Romero.
Here.
Josefina Dominguez.
Here.
Courtney Jackson.
Here.
And Yolanda Montoya Cordova.
Here. So the meeting format, the Board of Education meetings will be hybrid meetings with community members and public forum speakers having a choice to attend in person at the John Milne Community Boardroom or virtually at www.aps.edu. Presenters and recognition guests will attend virtually. Public forum, either virtual or in person, is part of the Board of Education meetings on the first and third Wednesdays of the month. Regardless if public forum speakers attend in person or virtually, all speakers will sign up for the public forum on the APS website the day of the meeting and before the start of the meeting. Please be sure to visit the APS website to check out the agenda. You may participate by attending the meeting in person, watching the live stream of upcoming meetings by clicking on the live meeting stream button on the main board page at www.aps.edu, emailing input, comments, and questions to board members at board.ed@aps.edu, or calling us at 505-880-3729. So our first item for consideration and action is adoption of the June 1st, 2022 Board of Education meeting agenda, and approval of the May 4th, 2022 and May 17th, 2022 Board of Education meeting minutes, and the February 23rd, 2022, April 13, 2022, and the May 25th Special Board of Education meetings. This is an action item, so may I have a motion?
So moved. This is Barbara.
Second, this is Courtney.
May I have a roll call, please?
Peggy Miller-Argon,
Yes.
Danielle Gonzalez,
Yes.
Barbara Peterson,
Yes.
Crystal Tapia Romero,
Yes.
Josefina Dominguez,
yes,
Courtney Jackson.
Yes.
And Yolanda Montoya Cordova.
Yes. Okay, so our next item is recognition of students, staff, and community, and Board Member Jackson will lead us in this section.
Welcome to our virtual recognition. The recognition guests and their families and friends have been invited to watch the Board of Education meeting on the live stream as we celebrate their achievements. Our first recognition is the May Employees of the Month. This month's honorees include a head custodian, senior benefits analyst, building manager, and elementary school principal. Victor Quinones is the building manager at Bonifacio Professional Development Center. Victor is amazing at what he does. He's helpful, always ready to go above and beyond, and dependable. Victor cares very much about his job, the building he manages, and the people who use it. He's always in a great mood and very welcoming to anyone who enters the building. His dedication is immeasurable. No matter how big or small the meeting or event, he treats everyone the same. Ann Johnson is a senior benefits analyst. Ann is consistently considerate, kind, and thoughtful in her responses to coworkers and employees. She also brings a depth of wisdom to the benefits of medical and non-medical plans, contracting, retirement, compensation, and compliance that few in the industry have. She has a wonderful way of listening and explaining hard to grasp benefits-related concepts so others understand and make informed decisions. Casey Reed Cadleck is the principal of Inez Elementary School. Casey spends countless hours and energy making sure the school is a safe and effective learning environment for students and staff. She's often at school long before her duty day starts and stays late into the night. If a student is in danger, she will not rest until he or she is safe. Her dedication to her students and staff is incredible. Tobias Archuleta, the head custodian at Mary Ann Binford Elementary School, is super positive every day. He's a great supervisor and teacher of his craft to younger and newer custodians. He is extremely welcoming to students, staff, and families. Tobias ensures the school's overall safety. Tobias also plays a crucial role in executing the school's vision and mission for students. He talks to students about their studies, joins in on class projects, and presides as a judge each year for the bilingual seal presentations for 5th grade. Congratulations, Victor, Ann, Casey, and Tobias. Our next recognition is an outstanding administrator. Dr. Gabriel Antonio Gonzalez was recently named the Bilingual Education Administrator of the Year at the 2022 New Mexico Association of Bilingual Education Conference. This award recognizes an administrator who helps to ensure that bilingual education programs can operate effectively in school district settings. Congratulations, Antonio. We are proud of your work and dedication to supporting bilingual education. Our next recognition is the New Mexico School Board Association's Excellence in Student Achievement Award winners. In 2018, 3 APS schools were identified by the Public Education Department as in need of more rigorous intervention. The options given by the PED were to close the school, restart the school as a charter school, or do a significant restructuring and redesigning of the school. APS chose the latter. After working closely with each school community, an intervention plan profile was submitted and included implementing the community schools model, hiring a new turnaround principal at each school, recruiting highly effective and exemplary teachers, implementing weekly professional development, and implementing a daily Genius Hour for students. Today, all 3 schools are thriving due in large part to the excellent leadership of their turnaround principals, Cesar Hernandez, Kimberly Fink, and Judy Martin Tafoya. Their work to remodel the schools has led to improved test scores and an increase in the percentage of students who met or exceeded expectations. Their high expectations, unique ways of helping students think critically and work collaboratively, and focus on working as a community has become a model for schools both inside and outside APS. In recognition of their excellent work on behalf of students, the Board of Education unanimously voted to present Cesar, Kimberly, and Judy with the New Mexico School Board Association's Excellent in Student Achievement Award. Thank you for all your work to help students and communities excel. Our next recognition is for 2 exceptional nurses. Melissa Parker and Patrick Parker, nurses at Atrisco Heritage Academy High School, have been selected as the APS School Nurses of the Year. They were chosen for this honor due to their coordination of care delivery, advocacy for students and families, leadership, demonstration of high standards of personal and professional conduct, provision of health education and strategies to promote health and a safe environment, active participation in nurse professional development, and facilitation of an interdisciplinary process with other members of the healthcare team. Melissa and Patrick, who met while training nurses to serve in Afghanistan, are a dynamic duo who serve their community with expert care, best practices, current information, endless patience, and deep compassion. Through their efforts and expertise, students are able to live more healthfully, whether through access to personal hygiene, assistance with medication administration, offer support during a mental health crisis, suggest resources for drug addiction, or design a plan to return to school after a serious injury or illness. Melissa and Patrick have made the lives of students, staff, and visitors healthier, more empowered, and positive. Congratulations, Melissa and Patrick. Our next recognition is an extraordinary history teacher. Karen Derzinski Cox was named the state's outstanding American history teacher by the Society of the Daughters of the American Revolution of New Mexico and has been entered into the organization's national competition, which, if received, will culminate in a recognition at the Washington, D.C. conference this summer. Karen, a 20-year teaching veteran, is a James Madison Senior Fellow, a prestigious congressional fellowship, and has earned, the right to the title Constitutional Teacher Scholar after completing her second master's degree in American History and Government. Karen acquired membership in Daughters of the American Revolution through a Spanish conquistador ancestor who helped fund the American War of Independence. Congratulations, Karen.
I went to high school with her.
Oh, very cool. Did I say her middle name right?
You did.
Okay, good.
Derzinski, you were right on.
Derzinski, yeah. Our next recognition is an excellent principal. Marisol Fraga, the principal of Cleveland Middle School, was recently recognized by Enlace Comunitario. She is a multi-generational New Mexican Latina who is driven by a passion for education and equity. She has worked in education for more than 17 years, including serving as a teacher of language arts, history, and English as a second language, and as a principal. Principal Fraga sits on the board of the APS Principal Association, as well as the English Expo Board. She is also a member of the Delta Kappa Gamma Women Educators. Congratulations, Principal Fraga. Our next recognition is for several grant-winning schools. Comanche, Lowell, Mitchell, and Zuni Elementary Schools and Del Norte High School received a $5,000 library grant from the Laura Bush Foundation to update and diversify library collections. The Laura Bush Foundation for America's Libraries supports school libraries with the greatest need, with the goal of encouraging all students to develop a love of reading and learning. Since its inception in 2002, it has awarded more than $19.5 million to more than 3,300 schools across the country. Comanche librarian Beth Bunzel, Lowell librarian Brenda Cazares, Mitchell librarian Heather Willingham, Zuni librarian Angela Main, and Del Norte librarian Lisa Herndon are excited to provide new library resources for their communities. Some of them have asked their students what they would love to read and made purchases based on their feedback. Some plan to purchase fiction and nonfiction books by Indigenous authors to reflect their cultures and experiences. Others plan to update their libraries with current, high-interest, and quality books that help students make sense of their world by learning about their unique backgrounds and experiences authentically represented and grappling with perspectives that are different from their own. Congratulations to the libraries of Comanche, Lowell, Mitchell, Zuni, and Del Norte. And our last recognition is a board member's birthday. Yolanda Montoya Cordova celebrated her birthday last week. 27?
27.
Will you join me in watching her birthday video?
Aw, I love these. It was a party.
I've never seen a birthday video on.
No?
Birthday.
Thank you. Yay.
Board members, will you please join me in showing signs of appreciation for our recognition guests? Each of these recognitions will be displayed on the Board of Education recognition webpage. I encourage everyone to check it out. That concludes our recognitions.
Oh, okay. Keep going. Public forum.
Back to me. I want to welcome our public forum guests who are in the audience. Whether you are here with a request for the Board of Education to consider, provide information, or just see how the Board of Education operates, we want you to know that you are welcome. The Board of Education has established rules for expected civil behavior during the meeting and public forum. As part of the process to sign up to speak tonight, you were asked to read a copy of the procedural directive that outlines those rules for expected behavior. The presiding officer will enforce these rules as appropriate throughout the meeting. The Open Meetings Act, NMSA 1978, Chapter 10, Article 15, requires that agendas contain a list of specific items to be discussed or acted on at meetings. Due to these rules, public forum is not a dialogue with board members. Public forum is an opportunity for the Board of Education to listen to you and hear your comments. In just a few moments, your name will be called in the order it was received. Skip that part about virtual. Guests who are here to speak in person are asked to come to the microphone in the center aisle at the back of the room to speak when your name is called. When you have finished speaking in person, you may choose to leave the meeting and watch it on live stream. Tonight, there are two speakers. You have 2 minutes. You will be directed to please complete your sentence quickly at the end of your time. And if you felt that you were not able to convey your message, please send your comments to boarded@aps.edu. And in addition, oh no, she's on vacation. Never mind. So with that, will you please introduce our speakers?
Thank you, Board Member Jackson. Our first speaker tonight is Lynn Anton. Lynn, when you begin speaking, you'll have 2 minutes.
Board President Montoya Cordova, Superintendent Elder, and members of the board. I'm Lynn Anton, a proud APS school counselor. I'm here today to thank you for listening to our concerns. Yesterday, we learned that the Albuquerque Teachers Federation and Albuquerque Public Schools came to a tentative salary agreement for the 2022-23 school year. 2 important things were included in this agreement. First and foremost, both ATF and APS agreed to dissolve the career pathway system. Yes, you heard that. And number two, the district is committed to attracting and retaining the essential certified personnel whose services are indispensable for meeting the needs of all students. This includes audiologists, orientation and mobility specialists, school counselors, physical therapists, interpreters for the deaf, social workers, school nurses, SLPs, occupational therapists, athletic trainers, COTAs, PTAs, diagnosticians, school psychologists, transition specialists, and BCBAs. This is a win-win in acknowledging our support staff. Thank you to all the board members who met with us over the years to listen to our concerns. Thank you to Superintendent Elder for meeting with myself and Kathy last summer. Thank you to the social worker Fed reps who connected with us this year. And thanks to the board members and audience for listening to us during public forum over the last 2.5 years. Yes, it's been that long. We respectfully request that you approve the tentative salary agreement for the 2022-23 school year. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Anton. Our next speaker is Kathleen Hager. And Kathleen, you'll have 2 minutes once you start speaking.
Thank you. Superintendent Elder, Board President Montoya Cordova, and all board members. As Lynn said, for 2.5 years, we've been coming to you asking, pleading, begging at times to change how counselors and other essential personnel are promoted at APS. And we received something in the mail yesterday saying that a change had been agreed to between the ATF and APS. And included in that change was dissolving the career pathway system and also paying essential staff personnel according to their PED state licensure level. And we've been asking for that for 2.5 years, and hopefully that will come to fruition. I ask tonight that hopefully you have the budget to approve this agreement. I also ask that there's a lot of bits and pieces that seem a little vague still, and that maybe Mr. Elder, when APS is agreeing to all these different bits and pieces, that the head of counseling, the head of social work, the head of the departments will actually be able to be involved to give some feedback. For example, if we have a counselor come in with a Washington State license, how are we going to have reciprocal agreements for that? So again, thank you. Thank you for kind of putting up with us for 2.5 years. And I'm very grateful for the people that met with us and listened, because we've really felt like we were listened to you, by you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hager. And board members, that concludes public forum for this evening.
All right, thank you. That's always nice to have some thank yous. Thank you. So our next item is special issues, is consideration for approval of inter-function transfers for grant budgets for the month of May 2022. And this is a discussion action. Mihaela Marin, Senior Director of Grant Management, do you have the floor?
Thank you. Madam President, members of the board, presenting for your consideration of approval the inter-function transfer for grant management for the month of May 2022. We have 2 cross transfers for your review and approval. One of them is in the American Rescue Plan, and it is in alignment with the current approved budget, and we are aligning. We are basically planning putting the budget where it would be the most useful, if necessary, by the end of this fiscal year. This board meeting is the last one we have a chance on aligning the budget on cross transfers. Other than that, I did not see anything out of the ordinary, and I stand for questions.
Let's open it up. Are there any comments or questions on this? Not, I'll just ask for a motion.
I'll move for approval. This is Peggy.
This is Crystal. I'll second.
Ms. Yeager, can I have a roll call, please?
Peggy Mueller Aragon,
Yes.
Danielle Gonzalez,
Yes.
Barbara Peterson,
Yes.
Crystal Tapia Romero,
Yes.
Josefina Dominguez,
yes,
Courtney Jackson,
Yes.
Yolanda Montoya Cordova.
Yes. So our next item is consideration for approval of the joint Title I, Title II, and Title III grants application for the school year 2022-23, and this is also discussion action. Mahela Marin also presenting.
Thank you, Madam President, members of the board, presenting for your consideration the joint Title I, II, and III application for the school year 22-23. This is a recurring item similar to the Idea B application that we brought in front of you during the month of May. You were provided with a short summary trying to provide additional information and give you some tools in assessing this this application. And we have in attendance representatives from each program ready to support any questions you might have. And with that, we stand for questions.
Thank you, Ms. Marin. I was like Ms. Mahela. I was gonna say. I'll just open it up. Are there any questions?
I have a
Go ahead.
So, I guess my first question is this a all or nothing grant request, or can certain parts be approved or not approved?
Board member Jackson, I was not asked that particular item. The budget and the applications in front of you are aligning, are basically what was sent for review to the state. And any changes will have to be considered in combination with the program representative for it.
So, one of the things I'd like to point out is what the state has done with Title I, II, and III is it's a consolidated application, and the team we get our allocations, and the team meets and looks at what are different functions, and they create a plan together. So it's a lot of department work based on what school and student data is telling us. And so although Title I is a separate department, Title II falls within curriculum and instruction, and Title III falls within language and cultural equity, the team has adjusted their budgets to work together. Our budgets look a little bit smaller this year because of our enrollment, and so we've had to do some significant, made some difficult decisions, but kept the flavor of the desires for each of the budget items. So it comes as, here's what we're looking at for professional development with language acquisition, and for professional and for Title I, and how we work with our students in our Title I categories. But we are all here ready to answer questions that you may have about specific line items.
Okay, so so the Title II and the Title III applications would go in together, is what you're saying?
They are all submitted together, is my understanding. I don't know the rules about if it's an all or nothing kind of thing.
Okay, so I'll be more specific. So I have a concern, and this is my personal concern in the Title II application. I have a concern regarding the Grading for Equity pilot. There's a $300,000 denomination attached to that. And so my question was, is it possible, can part of that be removed? And the reason that I have personally have an issue with the Grading for Equity pilot is I believe that it lowers the expectations for our children. I believe that it sets the bar low, and I think it creates to quote, the soft bigotry of low expectations. And so I have real concern instituting a grading for equity pilot within our schools that does not create high expectations for our children. Because I think what it does is that it actually destroys standards and it lowers the need for mastery. And my concern is we are trying to improve our proficiency rates and we are trying to get better at math and language arts. And by instituting this grading for equity pilot, I think that sends us in the opposite direction. So what I am wondering is, can the rest, I guess it depends on my fellow board members, but I would have a concern on sending this grant through with that $300,000.
And I fully agree with you on we should have high expectations for all of our students. And we cannot expect them to not meet standards. And grading for equity doesn't mean do not meet the same standards. What it does is it broadens how we might look at different things. And I don't know if our new executive director of curriculum and instruction wants to add a little bit more detail about grading for equity, but by no means will we lower expectations and not require our students to meet mastery.
So good evening, Madam President, board members, and Superintendent Elder. I have read and reread some of research on the grading for equity, and my understanding and my beliefs is that it does actually it does the exact opposite. What is intended purpose is to focus on standards in assessment instead of looking at other things such as whether a student met behavior expectations or brought in extra items for a classroom to gain points, that it really focuses on communicating where a student is and what they know and are able to do aligned to our rigorous standards. And by no means is the intention for this project to lower expectations. It's actually the intention is to hold all students, regardless of where they go to school and what teacher they have, to the same expectations, and to clarify what proficiency and mastery of these standards are. And so it eliminates attendance grades, it eliminates bonus points, extra credit, and it focuses specifically on the skills and knowledge that's expected by our content standards. It also allows for students to communicate their proficiency in multiple ways. It focuses heavily on formative assessment strategies to inform instruction and to continually monitor student progress. So to me, it's really rising the expectation and not lowering the expectation by any means. We are currently grading in this arbitrary percentile score. And so when we communicate grades like an 80% versus 85%, that really doesn't communicate to anyone what a student knows and what the difference between those students are and where they are academically. And so this project helps to really focus communication on student strengths and then where the next growth areas are for students.
Okay. Thank you for your reply. I disagree. I'm concerned by what's written in here about grading practices must counteract institutional biases that historically reward students with privilege. And we must also protect student grades from our own implicit biases. That phraseology concerns me. I think that using a 0 to 4 scale is what is used in elementary school. And if that is then reflected with the middle and the high school, I'm concerned that that doesn't set our children up for what the real world looks like, where you are not given several chances to try and try and try again until you master something. I will say I understand the theory behind it. I don't think that in practice that's what actually happens. And my internal star tells me that it's important to have the ability to strive for more and to attempt to get the extra points and to attempt to do the extra credit if you really want that A or you really want that 95 or 98%. That's what drives me. And so it concerns me that this pilot is the first hint that this is where we might be going as a district. So I think that's my philosophy. I appreciate your response, and my philosophy is just different. So I guess my question then goes back to, is it an all or nothing, up or down for the vote on the passage of the grant?
Well, I want to interject here because I think what's before us is the application that's being submitted. And so included in that application is all of these budget items that are in there. So I would assume that we are probably also submitting an application based on a formula or a budget that's been given to us, correct? And so we've identified activities to fit within a specific range of funding. Yes, okay, that's so what the district has done is essentially taken that Title II amount, whatever it is down here, and has so the Title II amount is the 4.9 million, and they've broken it up into those categories that they've listed.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Madam Chair, Board Member Dominguez has her hand up too.
oh, go ahead, Board Member Dominguez.
How many schools are in the pilot?
If I may, a couple things about the pilot that I want to talk about. We were choosing a middle and a high school from each zone that have already started doing this work. And part of what we're doing in that is giving them more information. We are not going to require schools to go to a 0 to 4. We're not going to. What we're doing is we're going to be working with the schools and try to look at our grading practices to see if we are doing any gatekeeping. If there are ways that we can help students come to mastery in different ways. And so really looking and examining our practices. And this is not intended to be accusatory. It's a self-reflection, and it's opening our eyes into what kinds of practices have been around since the 1950s that we may need to adjust. And I understand that there is a balance between preparing students for the real world and also giving them opportunity and chances. And I know that we have to walk that tight line all the time. But the groups would be led. There would be focus groups where they do study a book called Grading for Equity, and they examine their own practices and really look and see. And as for example, one of the things that one of our high schools decided to do in Grading for Equity is they decided not to give zeros anymore, unless it was a true not turning in work. But they decided that 50 to 100 is their scale, and they would also allow resubmission of work. So a student was getting feedback on how they write, and then they could resubmit till they mastered the content. And what we're finding is that what the teachers are reporting to us is the students' motivation level is going higher and their grades are going up. So I just want to make sure that you knew we're not, the purpose of Grading for Equity is not to mandate a bunch of new policy and procedural directives, but is to examine our work.
Thank you. Board Member Dominguez, I'm sorry, did you have, go ahead.
Well, just a follow-up, and how does this align with Yazi Martinez? And I'm going to couple this with, I walk a fine line because I think we expect too little. And yet we don't provide enough bridge support in order to get our kids to step up. Yeah, and what's been on my radar since the math adoption are test scores. Only in that they represent all the kids that aren't getting hired at Sandia Labs. And I don't want to take the attitude that not everybody can do math. I want to challenge that attitude. And so as long as we are promoting that the sky's the limit, and that we are giving kids access so that they can come to the table and the table of power, whether it's at Sandia Labs, UNMH, but our kids, I'm glad you gave us the title of the book, because I don't want things watered down. I don't want a philosophy of charity taking root. And at the same time, I don't want our kids tracked out. Because historically, and I know this as a former AP teacher, I went after kids in mid-school, kids who, the way they reported to me, weren't honors types because a system had imposed that on them. We need to challenge that. And if Grading for Equity is about that, meaning you create a summer program that allows them to come into an honors program and at the 9th grade level and rise to the occasion because they've had a summer of beefy academic preparation. So I'll leave it at that.
I do need to also remind you that this was one of the approved initiatives in our ARPA spending plan. And we're just supplementing with some other professional development.
The board members, we used an element of this at Highland and at Rio Grande and at West Mesa when we were school improvement grant schools. These were large grants that were received back in the teens. And I think what's really important about it is it doesn't disallow opportunities to try harder or to gain extra credit. What it does is it removes some of the barriers that would impact poor kids. And so we did, one of the big things about it is it requires the teachers to really look at their grading practices and what they're actually grading and what they're trying to achieve. And what a lot of our teachers found, okay, and at different schools, was that they graded for compliance, that it really was best if you got it turned in on time. And if you had so many paragraphs and if you had the format fairly correct, then maybe there could be some, issues with what was actually said, or maybe you weren't using the right format, or maybe, and you wouldn't get hurt as much and they would say, we would have the teachers talk about, what do you think you're grading? And then we'd look at the rubrics, we'd look at the work, we'd share the work, and they would begin to realize maybe they weren't grading what they thought they were grading. And it had become more of a compliance issue. The other thing it took away was, and I can't believe, I remember when the board actually had to write this into policy, and it stunned me then, that you couldn't give tissue boxes for extra credit. I mean, kids had to actually do something to earn extra credit. And that would be the sort of things that you find in schools, that people with well-meaning intention, hey, I'm going to help you out. You come every day, you're a great kid, do this and I'll give you 5 points. As long as the do this is something academic, that's what's important. And I think that if we don't have these conversations and we allow things just to continue, then you do pander to the group, what you call the philosophy of low expectations. I might ask something different of you than I did of another student. And if you don't have those conversations, then you don't change that perception. And that's what the goal of this type of work is to do. And that's what we're pressing on. And it's something that we've been talking about for a long time. I would be very sorry to see that work go away, especially in schools that have wide spectrum of students and really need to have, and the staffs really need to have those conversations through that lens.
Thank you. Board Member Peterson.
Just to add to that, I was lucky enough to get to sit at a table at the Share Fair, the professional Share Fair, with a couple of teachers who had taken on grading for equity as their focus in their project. And what they shared was, first off, 0 to 50 gives a student very little information. It's pretty arbitrary and pretty vague. And taking away that 0 to 50 is failing, sort of opened the door for them to motivate those students to keep working at mastery, working towards mastery. And so that was one big thing. They felt like it really strengthened their relationship with the students who were struggling. The other thing that they shared was that overall, it really improved their relationship with students, because it was no longer you're being penalized for coming in late, which, that's a separate problem. That's a problem that needs to be addressed. That needs to be dealt with. That does not reflect mastery of a subject or of a concept. And the other thing is that as we move more and more towards project-based learning and very interactive, active learning, then the old style of grading doesn't really work. That what you're looking at is where are you? How are you moving in understanding this concept? Where's your development? What are you not getting? And so things like using rubrics aren't on a 0 to 100 scale. It's really based on how close to that mastery are you? And so the teachers that had done this, and these were a couple of them were pretty crusty old teachers who had been at it for a long time, really found that it opened their eyes in a new way to the capabilities of their students, and was really positive.
Thank you. Board Member Mueller Aragon.
Well, that was one of the ones that I picked out as well. And it's just not where I come from. If you don't turn something in on time, those are deadlines we all have to meet. You all have to do that. We have to meet deadlines. Important thing to know. Important thing to learn. When we turn something in, we have to turn it in. We don't give a chance to redo our work. Somebody's doing surgery, they got to do it then. They don't get a chance to redo it. So we have to think about like real life. If you're late and you keep being late, you're going to probably get fired. So these are just things that we have to teach our children. And the fact that I know superintendent said that this impacts poor kids, and I have a really hard time believing that. I taught in all parts of the city, and I grew up in
a neighborhood across the street from the projects, and I almost always got A's. And so I don't know if that's like privilege. Should I not have got them because my parents spoke another language and my grandparents did, and then my grades weren't really what I deserved because shouldn't have got them. So how do you encounter institutional biases? Like I still don't get that. I would never do that to my students. So I just don't see it. I just don't understand now. An A is not an A, and it depends on what metrics, or does it depend on what gender, what race, your SES background? And you get more time, or you get to turn in over and over again, depending on what?
Are you asking that as a question?
I'm asking a question.
So the answer to that is, let's use your surgeon example. Okay, a surgeon has to be trained. Surgeon has to learn how to do it. First time a surgeon operates, you don't let them operate on a live body because they know it's not going to go well. So you operate on a mannequin or you operate on a dead body, and you let them make the mistakes there so that they learn how to do it, so that when they do go out into the real world, they have those skills. I would equate that to what we do with our students. Our kids, we know, come sometimes behind. I don't think I said it had anything to do with poor children. What I think I said was they're trying to look at biases in the system that might negatively impact children who don't have the ability to do things like bring in boxes of tissues. You know, it's just not something the family's capacity. And maybe they're late. Why are they late? And we talk about this in the community schools all the time. And then, you know, you're a big supporter of the community schools. We're all a big supporter of the community schools. We have to understand why the child is late and work with the family to remove any barriers. Now, if it's just a kid who's being belligerent and saying, I'm not going to school, that's one thing, right? But if it's another thing where we've got a child who's having to watch the younger sibling until the bus picks up and then they run to school and they're 10 minutes late, should we be continually penalizing that child because of the family situation? So the concept is not just blanket punish because we say you have to be on time. We say, let's see what we can do and see if there's a barrier we can remove. Is there a neighbor that can help? Is there something we do? And that's what the community school people do. So I think the idea is we make this less black and white in terms of the arbitrariness of some rules and have those kind of conversations and encourage teachers to really get to the nitty gritty of how do we get this child to mastery? You learned how to do things and somebody encouraged you and you probably did them a couple of times and you got really good at them and got the grades you earned. So I think those kids can still learn those grades. I have many examples throughout my teaching career as a principal watching students from very difficult situations do very well. And I watched others who fell, and I think sometimes they fell because they kind of slipped through cracks and we didn't reach them. But the goal is not to demean or to reduce or to make things easier. The goal is to just look at what might be inherent barriers for certain students and subgroups and to try to make sure we're not the cause of those barriers.
I mean, I'm looking, grading practices must counteract institutional biases. I don't believe an institution can have biases. People can, the institution can't, that have historically rewarded students with privilege. What privilege? And punish those without. I would say I didn't have privilege, but I got good grades and nobody punished me because of any kind of biases. I just have that is the one thing when I was looking through this that I just have a really hard time with, and I would not want to have the grading for equity pilot. So can that be pulled off of here is the question. Like, we can approve everything else. Can that be pulled off? I think that's what Madam Secretary was trying to
I think we still need to get to the rest of the board too, to see also what the board also would like to see happen as well. So far,
absolutely.
It's you and Ms.
Absolutely.
Jackson, but so do you have some other comments on the rest of the application?
I do. So that is one, and we just have to remember that we live under equal protection and not under equity. That's what our Constitution is all about. So then on page 52, I think, vision and goals for Title II, because all I had on the first one was, so it's increasing and measuring student achievement. APS will increase student achievement. So when you're doing the description and then you talk about having a metric. So what is that metric and what does increasing student achievement look like? Because it wasn't specific.
Board Member Mueller-Aragon, we have utilized our interim and summative assessment for that, and all of that data is on the SAPR website. That is something that we use, and our schools pare down, develop their 90-day plans, and we're aligning our strategies around their 90-day plans and the support that they need.
So you're using you're using this to increase student achievement. So that has happened, because if it hasn't happened, then we wouldn't be, all these different categories that the money is going to wouldn't be there if we wouldn't be increasing student achievement. Is that what you're saying?
I don't know. I'm not sure I understand your question.
So it says on the description, increasing and measuring student achievement, APS will increase student achievement. So we have that. You said we have the summative and formative assessments that prove that we are increasing student achievement, and we're using our money wisely because we are increasing student achievement.
Actually, I said that that is the data that we use to measure student achievement. And we're hopeful that the structures we set up with TLN, with the principal professional development, with the teacher mentorship for the novice teachers will help to set up a structure that would, yes, improve student achievement. That is what our goal is and what we are aiming for.
Okay, so until we implement all of these, we're not going to know if we have increased student achievement then. So we have to wait for that information then?
That would be how we're going to measure it, yes.
Okay, and then on the K-12 Summer Math Institute, it says we'll increase content for the professional development part, increase content knowledge and implementation of equitable and effective. I think you meant instruction, not instructional, now that I'm reading that. So I'm just confused about that. Math, how do you make 1 + 1 = 2 equitable? I mean, you know me, I am just totally confused about this all equitable stuff. Do you have to have ethnic pictures of, the demographics of every classroom? Like, I just want to know that. And I'm going to keep asking that question.
We know that students excel or more likely to excel if they can see themselves in the curriculum. And so part of what makes something equitable is that we are really looking at how we develop our lessons so that we're able to address the different needs of different students, whether that is ethnic culture or whether that is the culture of that age group. Teachers are constantly having to develop lessons, develop relationships, and really look at how they can bring to life their curriculum through their pedagogy. And so we are really looking at our pedagogies and the lesson development so that they have those kinds of items in them.
Okay, I say we're human and we all look like humans, and I shouldn't have been able to excel because I learned how to read with Dick and Jane. That's how old I am. So I never saw that. So I shouldn't have excelled. So I'm just one of the exceptions then. And I find that a despicable thing to say.
I'm not sure that we're saying that they can't excel. I'm saying that we're trying to open doors to help broaden their horizons.
If they see themselves. So they see themselves as their ethnicity, their gender, their SES background, and I still find that horrible because that would mean I shouldn't be where I am. So then the other question I have is under professional development for teachers. It has under the third bullet, it has access and again, equity. And it says it targets an academic plateau that English learner students with disabilities experience in language and academic growth due to the compound nature of limited English proficiency and learning disabilities. So then don't ELLs, students with disabilities don't encounter the same kind of plateau? And if they do, wouldn't we learn from that? Isn't there something to learn from that if they encounter the same plateau as our ELL students?
I noticed that Senior Director Villalobos turned on her camera, and I think she may have a couple things to add there.
Madam President, members of the board, Board Member Mueller Aragon, Superintendent Elder, thank you for that question. In Albuquerque Public Schools, we do have over 3,000 students who are identified as English learners with disabilities. And so our main goal and target is to meet the needs of those students with both of the federally mandated services, while making sure that we have high expectations for English language development, as well as servicing the students with whatever is in their IEP. Angela Rodriguez, our Title III director, can probably add a little bit more to that.
Good evening, Madam President, board members of the board, Superintendent Elder. One of the things that we are trying to do with the Title III grant, which is specifically for English language learners, is offer professional development that is targeted and specific to EL students with disabilities. And so next year, we're hoping to contract with an expert consultant and engage teachers who are special education ELD teachers to engage in a year-long professional development cohort where they can learn strategies, collaborate with one another, apply those instructional strategies that are research-based specifically for this group of students, and then come back. How did it work in the classroom? Let's talk about the impacts, and then let's continue to grow and develop and implement in our classrooms.
Okay, thank you. And then the last thing I have is on the vision and goals for Title II is ensuring educators have access to high quality professional development aligned to equity drive, high quality instructional materials. So is this just total professional development so that teachers will be able to look at textbooks? Or is this a certain group of people that will just be looking at textbooks to find, again, cultural bias in text?
So Board Member Mueller Aragon, one of the things that we recognized in our, I think I'm in the right spot, professional development, that Title II, of course, is all about professional development.
Right.
And one of the things that we recognized with the math adoption is that we really needed to have all parts of our system looking at the instructional materials to make a decision that is best. That includes CLR practices. And I don't know if Executive Director Gormley, if you wanted to add anything to that, because my mind just totally went blank.
So it's just a group of people that will be looking at the selection process, and they'll be looking at the materials to try to find cultural bias.
That wouldn't be the only purpose. It would be the whole broad range. Do we have accessibility for our students that need accessibility? It would be the whole, and so it's members from all of those departments that will look at it and help to rate them, as well as going through the full process of having teacher groups look at them, having the public look at them, but it's really looking at what our processes are and bringing everybody to the table now so that we don't have to come back to you 3 times next spring.
Board member, I think the reality of the training was based off the math adoption and some of the inconsistencies that you pointed out, and you'd like to see us improve So this was putting some money into that so that we have a more cohesive response. So as we move to the math adoption, if you want a K through 12 program, that we have people prepared and thinking along those lines, that that's the priority. And then looking for books that meet a variety of needs, both for ELL, special needs, all the vagrancies that come with being in a public school system.
Thank you.
Okay. So, I'm going to take it back to that one little paragraph that was brought up earlier, on the grading for equity pilot. And I hear what everyone's saying. I hear the explanation, that Ms. Garcia gave, that the superintendent gave, and that makes sense to me. Like, I get that part. I think the challenge is the way it's worded, like what we're seeing, on text versus what's being explained, I think tend to be, it's contradicting one another. I love the strategy, of talking about project-based learning and realizing, that students do learn differently. And I think that's really what makes the difference between a good teacher and a great teacher is you really get to know the styles of how your students learn. I just don't like the wording, that's in this. And it's mainly the second half of that whole paragraph, that it talks about, because I feel like grades are now being based on effort and not really based on being proficient on the skill that's being taught. So I feel like there's a disconnect there. And I hear you're saying, no, we're not going to take away from mastering the skill level. But again, what it says is different in text than what you are all explaining it. So that's the part that just doesn't sit right with me. Everything else I get, the numbers and the reason why we need it and the importance of the grant and what we're working towards. I like that. It's just the wording that there. So I share similar concerns, of what Board Member Jackson and Board Member Mueller-Aragon shared, and even a little bit what Board Member Dominguez said. So that's it. Thank you.
Board Member Gonzalez.
Yeah, I did not initially have questions about this grant, considering it as federal flow through dollars that are based on a formula. And I really do appreciate the action within PED to have a consolidated grant application because that helps forge coherence. So we're not siloing our teacher professional development from our English learner instruction, for example. So cohering Title II and III is super important. I think that's awesome. That said, following the conversation, I just want to say that I strongly support this grading for equity pilot. I think for many reasons. One, it's a pilot. So it is an opportunity for us to learn, to the point about gathering data, us across the board, the whole district, the board, administration, and teachers to understand how grading plays out and what we can learn from these things. The second is that it's research-based. What is cited here is from Harvard. There have been a variety of other pilots and approaches in other districts. And we know that this is what is best for kids, but in particular, kids of color. The third is competency-based. We know that competency and mastery is what we ought to be grading for. And as a parent of 4 young kids, I have experienced the exact opposite, where my kid was being graded for being quiet and compliant versus actually mastering the content. So she was bringing home straight A's, but was 2 years behind. So that's not what we want to see in our kids. So I do support this grading for equity pilot. I did also want to respond to some of the concerns around some of the specific language in here in terms of protecting kids from institutional and implicit and just structural bias. Those things do exist, and it is well researched. And so I would point specifically to the research from Deborah Ball at University of Michigan, who has done a lot of work on teacher education and the amount of decisions that teachers make every single day in the classroom. She has videos that have been analyzed to show the way that teachers disproportionately call on Black or white students because of that bias. And so these videos show teachers missing the brilliance of Black students because of that bias that exists. And so we do need to be very mindful of that. I think there's also very strong research from Yale, Professor Gormley there around disparate discipline in pre-K because of that same bias. We see that kids of color are disciplined at different rates, Black kids in particular, than white kids because of that bias. The third that I would point to is more recent research out of Stanford. Jason Akonafwa similarly did research in K-12 classrooms He found that kids of color were disciplined for things like getting up and getting a tissue in the middle of the class, but the same discipline wasn't meted out for white students. But that research actually then looked at interventions in terms of teacher PD. So we know these biases exist. Institutional biases, I think Board Member Dominguez brought up the gatekeeping practices for AP courses. We know that gatekeeping biases exist for gifted and talented too. There have been pilots in districts where they do universal assessment, universal testing for GNT, and guess what? More kids of color are admitted to gifted and talented because there isn't that teacher gatekeeping and bias. So I just want to say that the research and the evidence base is super clear that these biases exist at the institutional and at the individual level. And this seems like the type of thing that would address it, or at least help us learn more about it. So the only thing that I would say from the perspective of a former funder, I do think it's helpful to have data. And so it would be helpful I think if I was going to suggest any improvement to the proposal, it would be to include data on the student outcomes, numbers of students, numbers of teachers, et cetera, how we would be tracking the money. But overall, in terms of the strategy and the approach for this grant, I'm in favor. These grants.
Thank you. I just wanted to add, thank you for your comments on that too, because I do agree with you as well. Some of the things that we could see if we just even pointed to our own data would tell us where we have the disparity and where we have those gaps. I mean, we're trying to work to undo those gaps, and those gaps exist, I think, because of some of the practices that we have in school that do those things like gatekeep or are not necessarily treating children all fairly. I think those things do occur. Yes, we do have kids of color that do succeed, and there are kids of color who have a tremendous amount of resilience, and I'm not going to negate that, but we also know that that's just not the norm. It's just not what happens to all students, and I'd like to see it happen to all students, and I will just say from a workforce perspective, in terms of when we evaluate employees, because I've just finished evaluating employees, we don't evaluate by a percentage score. It's not like you got an 85% on this particular task. It's usually you either mastered it or you didn't. And one of the things that we're seeing with young people, one of the issues that employers are having is this lack of stick-to-itiveness, because students are, if they get that, you just didn't quite master this particular skill, they'll just quit. They'll quit a job, and we don't want kids to quit. And so I like the opportunity of, I think school is part of that. It's part of the education of teaching our children to stick to it. But we also have to have an environment that also fosters that and really rewards that too. And it's okay to fail. I mean, not all of us succeeded in the first time we did something, and it's okay to fail. And I will tell you, there has always been a great adult behind that who told you keep moving or keep going on. And I want every student to have that opportunity to do that. So I don't have any questions at all. I think this is also, from an operational perspective, we've great to get our grant in. I'm grateful that it's also in a consolidated package, because I think it does allow us to do some coordination. So what I'll do is I'll just ask for a motion.
I will move for approval as it stands.
I'll second. This is Danielle.
Sager, can I have a roll call, please?
Peggy Mueller-Aragon.
I'm going to vote yes, but with reservations, with the pilot on grading for equity and reservations on so much focus on equity rather than equality.
Danielle Gonzalez.
Yes.
Barbara Peterson.
Yes.
Crystal Tapia Romero.
Yes.
Josefina Dominguez.
Yes.
Courtney Jackson.
Yes, also with reservations.
And Yolanda Montoya Cordova.
Yes. All right. We'll move on to our next item, which is consideration for approval of the notice of disapproval of the FY23 budget for the New America School. This is also a discussion action. See, who do we have? Mark Garcia, Executive Director of Office of Innovation and School Choice, and Dr. Joseph Escobedo.
Good evening, Madam President, members of the board, Superintendent Elder. Tonight, we present for your consideration a notice of disapproval of the FY23 budget for New America School, New Mexico. As a reminder, you voted unanimously to disapprove this budget. And in the notice, we cite the concerns from the budget and encourage the school to make changes and meet with our staff. Dr. Escobedo is also here tonight to help answer questions that you might have for us.
I'll just open it up. Any questions? Do I have a motion?
I mean, I'll move for approval and then I'll have a quick question.
Sure.
So what will happen, Dr. Escobedo or Mr. Garcia, after they receive this letter? I mean, what's the next step?
Madam President, members of the board, Superintendent Elder, as you'll note, we are copying the Public Education Department to let them know of the disapproval. And there is a statutory deadline for them to submit their budget. So we hope that they will work with us and make the revisions as to the concerns as requested.
Okay, thank you.
This is Crystal, second.
Do we have, you moved, right?
Yes.
Yes, moved in second. Ms. Yeager, we have a roll call, please.
Peggy Mueller Aragon,
Yes.
Danielle Gonzalez,
Yes.
Barbara Peterson,
Yes.
Crystal Tapia Romero,
Yes.
Josefina Dominguez,
Yes.
Courtney Jackson,
Yes.
Yolanda Montoya Cordova.
Yes. All right. So our next item is going to be consideration for approval of the proposed Albuquerque Public School budget for fiscal year 2023. This is going to be a bunch of discussion and a lot of action. I just want to, I think before we jump into this is, the goal tonight, if you notice, I did change up the agenda a lot, removed some items so that we could just roll up our sleeves, get to work, answer some questions, and hopefully we can get something that we can get submitted. So I just want to say thanks to Brenda, Board Services, and to the staff for compiling a lot of information so that we would have, a lot of information before us. We could study, we could take a look at some documents as we're going forward. And so I do want to let the board members know, I mean, where are we? We're at 6:25, which is good, actually. And we're on this item. We have just this one to go through. And if we need to take a break, we can, because we do have some refreshments for ourselves too, as we're going through this, noting that it might be something that was going to take us a while. We've got some cupcakes. So we actually have sandwiches just in case we're going to go long. So I am committed to making this a working session so that we can get through as much as we can. I think it's going to be a learning process for all of us too, because, with a lot of members being here for 5 months, a process that started before you, we're still coming in on the second end. It's not perfect, but I think we're learning a lot from this and we can continue to keep moving forward. What I will say is that I have a lot of confidence in this board, and knowing that one of the things that we can always do is that we always have the ability to monitor the activities and the budget as we're going throughout the school year. And this piece is for us to get a budget approved so we can send it up to PED. We can receive some funds and we can start moving forward and rolling the district forward this next year. But also knowing that we're going to hit the ground running on July 1, too, with also preparing ourselves for budgeting for even the next year after that, but learning from this process and what can we do differently. So with that, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to open this up. Superintendent Elder and cabinet members, you have the floor.
Madam President, members of the board, thank you. We stand before you tonight to do a little addendum to the budget presentation. And I think what I'd like to start by saying is that, last week we presented a very large overview of the budget. And I feel the board was drilling down into some areas that we were struggling to understand what was being asked for exactly and how you wanted to see that. And we went back and we reflected and we realized that a lot of what you're getting into is what are the processes that are in place to assure people that certain things happen. So, for example, what happened with the Ozzie Martinez Howard schools? adapting to the Yazzie Martinez lawsuit in light of budgetary restrictions. Okay. And how exactly does that all come together? So we're showing you sort of how the district puts a budget together. And I think tonight what we have decided is, one, you gave me 4 questions that I asked you specifically, what is it you want? And I said, we're going to answer those 4 questions, and we're going to answer them, I think, clearly, and I think we're going to be okay. 2, we are going to get it. We realize we have a lot of processes that we utilize both as a district and with the schools to have the type of conversations that I think you were asking about, that quite frankly, when you're asking Tammy and I, we're not really we're kind of a step or 2 removed from that. For us to get into that detail is tricky. So tonight I do have the zone associates with me and people to really talk about those processes and how those conversations occur, and assure you some of the things that you're asking about. The last thing that I want to say is, oops, I hate this because they cram my notes way down in the bottom and I can't see them. So, we know 4 questions, the impact to individual school budgets. We show you that. What is the impact of the school-based cuts to identified areas of Yazzie Martinez? What school-based programs were impacted and how were departments cut? So again, we have the zone associates here tonight, Andy Von Garcia, and they're going to talk to you guys a little bit about the overall process and what that happened. And what I want you to see is we have processes, and they're useful. We also recognize that as a board, you would like us to be willing to visit with you about how those processes can be improved and reflect maybe different types of information than we have traditionally collected. So that's great. Happy to do that. And we'll simply have to work on that moving forward. But I do want you to know this is what we've got. And I think we answer your questions. So moving on to question 1, what is the impact to the individual school budgets? And I think Ms. Garcia is just going to give you a very brief, and we're with you. We don't want to take this long. We're going to get through this presentation completely, but not take forever. We're going to get you all the documents and help you understand what you're seeing. So it'll be good. So Ms. Garcia.
Thank you. He was saying that mostly for me so that I didn't drone on and on and on. But just so that we're all in the same frame of reference, want to let you know how schools are funded. In your packet, and I believe it was 1B, you were given the staffing allocations. So schools have an enrollment, and we use the 80th day from the previous year, and we set parameters around number of counselors, number of assistant principals, number of total administrators, all of those kinds of things. And then they are also given, based on their count of at-risk students, they are given at-risk money that they can use how they need to in order to address those specific needs. They also have other funds, like they may have bilingual funds, they may have Title I funds based on their enrollment and their student demographics. Then they are required to go out to their community and get staff and instruction and their staff meetings to get approval on their document before they submit it. What you're also going to hear is the approval process and the budget optimization. And we know we have some outliers that in order to meet, and so then we will have program modifications that they can submit based and show that they align with the district priorities in terms of what they might be asking money for. So also in your packet is a spreadsheet with historical data that Scott's going to give a little bit of a conversation about, and the zone associates are going to chime in with some examples as well. So back to you, Superintendent Elder.
Okay, and I would just say when we take that out, it's not just the staff that gives input, it's the community as well. So that could be through the instructional council, PTA. There's a lot of different ways schools handle that, but they do take input. And there is a signature process, and then there's approval when they get to the district. The spreadsheet we'd like you to look at now is document 1A, which is the common comparison. It's F20 through fiscal year 20 through fiscal year 23 enrollment. And you see the impact on MEM and or MEM, and you see the impact on FTE. So FTE, full-time teacher equivalency, MEM membership, gives you an idea of what was happening at the schools. And this is helpful in that you see how we made adjustments. And I want to remind you that the reason the impact this year was so powerful and so, as you called it, traumatic, was because it's really reflective of, it really was 3 years of needing to reduce staffing crammed into 1 year. And so we really went, because we held people harmless. We held people harmless through the pandemic, and we've been doing this for quite a while. We have a number of stories of schools that were really close to having a full-time librarian, and so we'd fund it. Or they were really close to getting that counselor they needed, and so we'd fund it. And those things sort of stayed no matter what happened to the enrollment. So this year we made a rather radical decision to right-size the district, and that's step one. And so you're going to see what we realized though is this sheet's nice, but you can't tell the whole story, and every school's a story. So we're going to try to highlight a couple for you tonight that may have jumped out at you. We can't do all 143 schools tonight, but we're going to do a few. And the one I was going to use was if you look at line 12 and line 13, you see Arroyo del Oso and you see Atrisco Elementary School. And if you just go to the last two columns, you see the difference between fiscal year 20 and fiscal year 23 membership was both schools lost 70 kids. But then you look at the FTE, and Arroyo del Oso really had a 0.3 impacted, and somehow Atrisco Elementary School picked up eight teachers, even though they lost 70 kids. So what happened there? Well, we added special ed programs, and we placed programs at Atrisco. Even though they lost general ed students, they picked up special needs populations. And in some of these programs, you need to realize you may have 8 kids and 3 adults in each classroom. The per pupil expenditure in these programs is exponentially higher than anywhere else. So when you start looking at schools and saying, well, why is this school why is it exponentially higher in its per pupil expenditure? It's almost always going to be tied to special ed. So that was one of the examples we had, and just because they sat side by side, it made it very easy. You don't have to jump around a lot and look at it. I know we have the Zone Associates that they would like to present a little bit of some of their stories. I'm not sure who's first, and since I can't see, that's Gene. All right.
I will start, Superintendent Elder. So, Madam President, members of the board, and Superintendent Elder, tonight I will be sharing with you one example of how program changes, drop in enrollment, have impacted two of the schools in Learning Zone 1. So on the same Form 1A, the FY 2023 enrollment in FTE spreadsheet, on line 136 and line 144, you're going to see Van Buren Middle School and Wilson Middle School. So in 2021, we moved special education programs from district programs from Van Buren Middle School to Wilson Middle School. The students that were in these district programs were actually lived in the Wilson boundary area, making Wilson their home school. This move involved 14 students and 7 staff members. These staff included teachers and educational assistants. From 2020 to 2023, a loss of 109 students at Van Buren also impacted the amount of staff needed to support students. In column I, you're going to see that next year Van Buren has projections of 403, where Wilson has projections of 405. That's the students of membership. In column L, you'll see that Van Buren has staff of 48, where Wilson has a staff of 59. That's an 11 FTE difference with only a 2 student difference. This is a direct result of the special ed programs that Superintendent Elder referenced to that are currently at Wilson, requiring 3 staff members to every 8 students in program. So this is just one example that illustrates how program moves, program staff requirements, and the drop in enrollment have impacted these schools. And with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Learning Zone Associate Superintendent, Dr. Gonzalez, for another example.
Madam President, members of the board, and Superintendent Elder, good evening. Another example would be boundary changes and how they can also have an impact on school budgets over time. An example you may recall is Tres Volcanes Community Collaborative School opening in August of 2018. Based on its 4-year scaled opening, school enrollments at Truman, Jimmy Carter, S.R. Marmon, Painted Sky, and Chaparral Elementary schools decreased, in part based on the student population shifting to populate the new school. These boundary changes also work to make Truman a more pure feeder to Atrisco Heritage Academy and Jimmy Carter a more pure feeder to West Mesa High School, along with Tres Volcanes Community Collaborative School. This work aimed at right-sizing and the opening of a new school did have budgetary impacts on school allocations across different budgets, as described with the cited schools, again, Truman, Jimmy Carter, S.R. Marmon, Painted Sky, and Chaparral. And now for another example, I'd like to introduce Associate Superintendent Amanda DeBell.
Good evening, Madam President, Montoya Cordova, and board members. I would like to highlight, if you were looking at the document 1A, if you look down at line 28 and line 30, I'm looking at Comanche Elementary School and Corrales Elementary School. So I would like to highlight these two schools because they are similar in size and they have decreased their enrollment since the FY, so the fiscal year 20 year. You can see they started out at 366 for Comanche and 381 students at Corrales. Fast forward to FY 22, we are looking at 297 and 323. For the next school year, they are projected to be very similar in size, with Comanche projected to have 316 students and Corrales Elementary to have 314 students. When we look over just to the far right, you will notice the difference between fiscal year 20 and 23 membership. They've lost more students at Corrales Elementary than at Comanche. However, when we look at the difference in the FTE, then you see that even though they're similar in size, Comanche is only losing 0.72 of a staff member and Corrales is losing 5.89 people. So when we look into their budgets deeply, we can tell that the number of staff is different also. So going back to column L, and Corrales Elementary also, just taking a look at another document that we will look at shortly, but Corrales Elementary received $256,714 in at-risk, and they serve the community with an outside of APS preschool program. They have 3 special education teachers, which will be funded on a different funding stream, and 2 cross-categorical educational assistants, and 1 that is child-specific, also known as a one-on-one EA. Comanche, on the other hand, received $257,761 in their at-risk dollars, and they also received $65,587 in their Title I dollars. The school is different from Corrales in that there is a pre-K teacher and EAs to go along with the program. The school also has special education programming known as cross-categorical programming that includes 4 teachers, 4 EAs, a speech language pathologist, and a full-time IEP specialist, as well as an ELA or an English language acquisition strategic support interventionist that was supported through the budget process. So we can see here that 2 similar sized schools have used their budgets in ways that support their unique school community. The instructional councils that include community members approve the school budgets, and the schools are within compliance for the student population that they are serving. We acknowledge that right-sizing the district has not been without discomfort, and we know that it may turn out to be a multi-year process, as you can see in this document. And we look forward to working alongside of the school board as we continue this process of right sizing. Once again, I want to reiterate that compliance is always met using a negotiated agreement as well as state statute. Thank you.
Good evening, Madam President, members of the board, Superintendent Elder. This is Troy Hughes. I'm the Zone Associate for Learning Zone 4. The one category that I'm going to talk about, school, is going to be on line 96 of your operational budget, and that'll be McKinley Middle School. I'll give you a couple of seconds to scroll there. As you get there, you'll see that McKinley has actually gone up in enrollment from 2020, when they had 429 kids, to this year's membership of over 510 students. So they went up a difference of 81 students over that course of time. And then the difference in FTE allotment is at 1.49. With that, we have met all of our requirements as you go through and you look at the staffing formula and things that go with that. McKinley was a great example of having a larger enrollment boom during the pandemic timeframe, and then when they came back out of the pandemic. So they did do a modification form to our budget last year. We increased it by a 0.6 that we were able to cover more of their math classes that needed to be covered as they went through. So it's a prime example of, as schools can go larger or smaller, the correspondence of having all of our numbers correct with them is played through. And then if there is a need for something to add to or take away towards their 20th day count, that's another procedure that we have in there to help balance their budget with the appropriate staffing. So that would be my part. And before I finish, I want to say happy birthday to Madam President. Congratulations, another year around the sun. There you go.
Woohoo.
So with that, we'd like to move on to question 2, which is, what is the impact of the school-based cuts to the identified areas of Yazzie Martinez? And we have a document, we refer you to document 2A. And to go over the at-risk expenditures from the Ed Plan alongside Title I and Family Index, we have Rosalinda Montoya from the Budget Office just to explain the form.
Superintendent Elder, this is Tammy Coleman. So Rosalinda is out sick today, and so Miss Julianne Hicks is going to go over this particular document.
We have Julianne Hicks to go over this particular document.
Thank you. Excuse me. Madam President, members of the board, this particular slide displays the amount of discretionary funding that each school will receive in fiscal year 23. The first column shows operational at-risk funding. The second column shows Title I federal grant funding. And the third column shows Family Income Index grant funding. What I'd like to walk through fairly briefly is our process of allocating operational at-risk funding to schools. The first thing we do is we allocate $70,000 flat amount to each school. Then we distribute, and that $70,000 to each school totals roughly $9 million. Then we distribute about $14 million to schools using 4 factors. The first factor is the percentage of socioeconomically disadvantaged students. The second factor is the percentage of mobility of the students. The third is the percentage of English language learners at that school. And the fourth factor is enrollment. And this process is very similar to the allocation methodology that the state uses to allocate at-risk funding to districts. And the balance of the at-risk funding includes counselors, nurses, health assistants, which are allocated by the Student, Family, and Community Supports Department. And with that, I stand for questions.
Well, actually, we're going to move on then to the budget optimization. We will take questions at some point, so don't go anywhere, Julianne. But I think we're going to talk about the budget optimization handout, and I believe Dr. Gonzalez.
Yes, Madam President, members of the board, Superintendent Elder, in your packet, you were given information regarding the individual school budget optimization process. This process was refined this year in its current form since we began the right sizing work at the school level. We used this forum where every school could share their academic plan and define their goals and priorities for budget submission at the budget call time. Given the loss of enrollment and ever-changing approaches that school used to address learning and achievement. So this was really a think tank meeting where the minds came together to optimize their budget along a few factors that I will describe shortly. Prior to the budget optimization meeting, which typically takes place in February or March, depending on the 30-day or 60-day legislative session, and based on the negotiated agreement with the Albuquerque Teachers Federation, school leadership collaborates with their school-based instructional council to align resources to the vision and mission of the school, as well as the 90-day continuous improvement plan. Generally, this process can take several months and is ongoing based on the 30, 60, and 90-day increments that make up the continuous improvement cycle. At the budget optimization meeting, school teams generally made up of the principal, assistant principal, instructional council chair, special education head teacher, and maybe a few other nuances depending on the school. A common template with common questions are given to the schools for them to prepare to share at this meeting. Some of the themes that are discussed are at-risk funding directly to address Yazzie Martinez student subgroups, enrichment and the support of our gifted student population, discussion around student school programs like AVID, bilingual, dual language, advanced placement, and so on. Continuous improvement connections to the school's 90-day plan and engagement of family and community. District teams join the school team at this budget optimization meeting. So the district teams are there to support the school in their planning and the optimization of their budget. They listen to the school's presentation and then offer feedback and a tailored support to each school's individual budget and presentation. Some of the departments present are curriculum and instruction, AVID, language and cultural equity, community schools, special education, finance, budget, and Title I. The tiers and systems of support, we recognize that extended learning time is one response to providing systems of support for our schools. When individual schools were given the opportunity to select an extended day or year calendar, that was one response to Yazzie Martinez. However, in the budget optimization meeting, if a school did not elect to go extended year calendar, then the budget optimization process closely examined the use of the school's budget. The process is one way of ensuring that the right students are being provided for by using the school's at-risk, Title I, dollars, and looking at the 90-day plan, making these various connections to have the most optimized budget rolled out at each school. To go into the actual presentation that you were given is Associate Superintendent Amanda DeBell.
Thank you, Dr. Gonzalez. So hopefully you have the template that schools use at the ready. And I would just like to walk you through it very quickly so that you can see that not only in building this template in order to help schools consider how they would be using their budgets in light of decreasing enrollment, perhaps at their school site. A lot of good thinking went into this. A lot of good thinking also went into this process at individual school sites where difficult conversations were being navigated with instructional councils and with different departments or grade levels. So hopefully now you've had some time to bring it up. I also want to make sure that along with that good thinking and maximizing our budgets, we wanted to make sure that we had a process in place that would help us to keep an instructional eye on the 90-day plan, and that that schools were planning for enriching as well as accelerating the learning of students. As schools are moving through the next school year, they will be checking their progress towards their goals. And to that end, this budget optimization process is not the only tool that they need to be using as they move through the school year. They have their 30, 60, and 90-day plans, where every 30 days, as Dr. Gonzalez referenced, as well as progress monitoring their students in the classroom. So I'll just go through this piece here. Schools were asked to define their goals and priorities in order to complete their budget submission. For us, they also had to think through how they were using at-risk dollars. Was it going to be that the FTE was ensuring, was it for FTE? Was it for ensuring equity for identified learners? They were asked to identify the Yazzie Martinez subgroups at their individual schools. So we really wanted to make sure that we could see how schools were in fact addressing Yazzie Martinez specifically. The next one is that because we knew that several schools had adjustments to their gifted allocation, we wanted to see how the school community was working to continue to address the subgroups that have been identified, and really think about how gifted instruction would continue, whether it was an enrichment program, et cetera, et cetera. And I won't go through every slide here, but I think it's important to note that we really wanted schools to think through where we know that they were being cut the most significant amounts. The next one is really thinking about how some schools had programs that they are committed to. So how were they finding the dollars for programming that they were committed to? So next, we asked schools to think about their Yazzie Martinez subgroups as they were considering their English language learners and bilingual programming. So you can see here that we also looked, and I'm going to skip now to slide number 11, if whoever is presenting would go to slide number 11.
Can we, I'm not quite sure what document we were on your presentation, Ms. DeBell.
Sorry. Okay, I'm sorry. Let me go back. So on.
Let's just move to the graphs.
Okay.
Okay, just move to the graphs. Okay.
On the APS budget optimization process, we included the school template here. So I'm sorry that we didn't have it there. But so we want to move to the graph.
Yeah, I can go ahead and take it from the graph part. So on these graphs, you're going to see that the two pie charts, each of the pie charts represent how the at-risk dollars were spent. You can see the 61% of the at-risk money at the district schools was used on staff, okay? And then you see the other breakouts as far as professional development, materials and supplies, software and technology, et cetera. Next slide, please. On the next slide, you'll see how that staffing was broken up. 35% of it was certified staff, 10% of it was administrative, and 60% of it was classified staff. And then again, you'll see the other breakouts as far as the other areas of money spent. As mentioned before, each of the school's instructional council, consisting of teachers and parents, made the decisions on how the money was used. If you'd like to take a deeper look at each of the schools in your zone, you'll find that on the specific budgets and their justifications on how that money was used, and that's been shared with you as well. Again, thank you, and with that, I'll turn it over to Ms. Coleman and Ms. Montoya.
Thank you, Jean. I appreciate that. I actually wanted to go over the history of the departmental cuts. But before I get to that, I would like to talk about the staffing plan just briefly. I think that was actually part of question one that I didn't interject myself in. And I just wanted to mention that this staffing plan, this is the staffing allocation formula that we use to build the school budgets for every year. So basically, you can see that they're based on enrollment. The principals are based on enrollment. The teachers are based on enrollment. Your counselors, nurses, all of your different employees at a school site are based on enrollment. The only one really that's not is your custodial staff, and they're based on square footage. So just wanted to touch briefly on that particular document. But the history of the departmental budgets, this was
Ms.
kind of,
Coleman,
yes.
all right, we're actually on question 3. You're jumping to 4. So I think you were just supposed to refer to the effect of right sizing on schools and the FTE brought to compliance level, which I think was the 4 years of MEM versus the 3 years of FTE.
Sorry about that.
We're all very excited.
We are all very excited. So basically, okay, so the 4 years worth of MEM that you have, that's our membership. Those are the students. And so that's basically what that MEM stands for. That is your membership at any given school. We do have 4 years worth of membership for you to show. There are 3 years worth of FTE data to show. And one of the biggest reasons is because our regulations changed here a few years ago that basically indicated differences in coding. And so prior to that, all of our special ed FTE, they weren't necessarily coded to the school site. And so those numbers from FY20 are not comparable to the other 3 years. In fact, they're considerably lower. So they basically create more questions than they answer because of the different coding. And Board Member Gonzalez, if you are thinking about the per pupil expenditure requirements that the federal government has put forth, that particular mandate, that's the laws that changed that required the change in the coding. So it was per pupil expenditures. And so you can see that the difference between the FY20 and FY23 MEM, most of the memberships have gone down at each of the schools. You can see at the bottom, there's a total of 7,800 kids or membership that basically has been reduced over the 3-year period. We do have a difference in the FTE, which is basically all staff at a particular school. It's not just teachers, it is all staff. That has been reduced by 735 over the 3-year period that we're looking at. And so that's basically going over that particular sheet. So
getting into the specific programs, I think Mr. Bell's going to come back and show us some things.
At this time, I'll show you what I'm looking at. I'm sorry about that. So get screen share access here. So one of the other questions that was asked of us last week was how specifically are the programs or how are programs being impacted by the right sizing that we are doing this school year. Hopefully you all can see this now. And so what this graph shows here is if we look at elementary, middle, and high schools, each of these bars is representing a different type of employee or program at a school site. And if you are looking for this, I don't think that you have this in your packets.
We did receive it. Ms. Yeager did send it to us, so.
12 today.
Yeah, principal survey on program decisions, but Yes.
We were scrambling to get because we had to talk to the schools.
Yeah,
And
we had to
this
go out to
concerning all the schools, so we had to-
and scramble to get this in the short days that we had. But I think it is a really telling story how schools and how the right sizing is in fact impacting. There's a couple of other stories that I would like to highlight here. So if I could, the first bar is that schools did not have to make adjustments to school programming. Here. Next is the administrators at school sites that might have been impacted by right sizing. And that would go back to the very first document that Ms. Garcia showed us this evening. Next, in the elementary, middle, and high school, we see the elective course programming that we have been talking about over the last couple of meetings. Support staff here, and support staff can be anything from a school clerical position. It could also be an educational assistant. There's a lot of different people that fall into that category, as well as interventionist positions. Then we look at school day programs. School day programs are an example of a category that includes such positions as family liaisons, deans, or vacant positions that were also included in this chart. And then next is the green, which is eliminated instructional positions, so a core teacher. So when you asked us what programs were impacted, we went out to the schools in order to gather this data. And I think that it might be easier to read along this way too, if you can see that. Elementary schools cut or adjusted positions where they felt that teachers might be able to fill the gap. And then we look at middle school and high schools separately. So in middle school, you can see that core teachers were protected, and we see where elective positions were cut from schools. I would like to remind this board this evening that this graph shows that schools, especially those secondary schools, go through a course selection process. And some courses might have been more highly selected than others, leaving the school maybe with that school community choice, an easier choice to see what courses are more, I hate to say it, but popular or needing to be in the course selection, such as PE. Secondly, to highlight the middle school and high school cuts, we can see here via the high school budgeting process that high schools may have been over budgeted because there are fewer full-time cuts at the high school level, despite increasing enrollment, whereas the middle schools have risen to the top as an area where we need to have some conversation for sure about funding and other structures. And that truly has come to our attention as us needing to include in our plan in the coming weeks, but for the coming year, so that we can really take a look at our middle school grades and how they are taking care of the needs of the students in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. I will stop sharing here.
Sorry, Ms. Bell, can I just clarify one thing? So I'm just looking at like the 44 support staff. Does that mean 44 schools were affected or 44 positions were affected?
That's a great question that from this level of detail, we are not able to tell. And I don't know, so we have the N of 70 and N of 31. So with this, it's hard to say if it was maybe 1 or 2 positions that might have been cut at a school, or if, I don't have that level of detail with this particular report.
It's most likely people, because a school could have cut 2.
Yeah, a school could well have cut 2 positions.
So it's not that 44 schools made cuts, it's 44 people.
Were cut.
You think?
Yes.
Okay.
Remember they went somewhere else.
No, I'm sorry. I was just trying to figure out what the x-axis was.
Right.
I think X.
It's just a total number.
And really what some of the comments, that we have heard from our staff during those budget optimization meetings was that some of these positions that were reduced in those buildings were in fact never filled. They were vacancies that may have been covered by a long-term substitute this year. And so not all of these positions highlighted on this graph equate to actual people that were cut or reduced from their building during the budgeting process.
Thank you. Sorry for the interruption.
That's okay. That's okay.
So I do believe we're moving on to question 4, and this is probably the easiest to get through. How were the departments cut? And we have talked about that. We have to give you the perspective of time on this one because there's a reason it gets to the point it did. You have to have that, I think, to understand the bigger picture. So Tammy, this is your time.
Thank you, Superintendent Elder. I appreciate that. So the illustration that you guys are looking at starts with the FY17 year, and there are actually 3 columns for the FY17 year because we had to cut really 3 different times for that particular year. The first time we cut was during the budget creation process, much like we're doing now. And we basically knew that during that time that there was going to be a special session called in the fall during the year. And we were instructed at that time to basically get ready for it. And so we set aside $7.6 million to help answer that reduction when it came down from Santa Fe. At that time, the emphasis by the superintendent was that cuts were to be kept away from schools as much as possible. And so that's why you see departmental cuts there. When those cuts finally did come down in October of 2016, we didn't have enough. We actually needed to reduce by $9.5 million rather than the 7.6 that we had set aside. So we actually had to reduce a little bit more, even beyond what we had already done. Then, this is brought back some nightmares that I had about that time, because when it came time for the unit value to be set in January, the unit value reduction basically took another $12.5 million out of our budget. And this is in the middle of the year. So how do you do mid-year cuts? And, we're a very large machine, and it's very difficult to do in the middle of the year. And so that's kind of why you see the types of cuts down below that you see, the $12.5 million. If you move on to FY18, those particular reductions carried forward. In addition to, we basically ended up cutting even more. That particular year, the school districts were instructed to plan for budget reductions. Again, all departments were required to reduce by another $4.8 million. In addition, all of our 12-month staff were basically reduced. Their pay was reduced by 4 days pay. And so we had a calendar reduction that particular year. In FY19, we didn't necessarily cut. And in fact, revenue rebounded. We did not put any of those cuts back. What we did was reduce our class size waiver that we were under at the time, trying to increase our class sizes by at least a little bit. And I bet Miss Peterson can remember some of these things. She probably remembers them with the same nightmarish slant. In FY20, when the revenue rebounded even a little bit more, we eliminated the class size waiver, increasing our class sizes, which of course increased our FTE all the way around. Then
Tammy, I'm going to correct you. We decreased our class sizes, which increased our FTE all around.
Thank you. Thank you.
And Board Member Mueller-Aragon had the privilege of being part of that then too. I think you came on later. Oh, okay. So we did all live through that nightmare.
We all lived through it. Yes, we did. In FY21, of course, this is, right at the tail end of COVID. When we were building our budget, we started building our budget in February before COVID even hit. Then COVID hit in the middle of the process. And, you know, we at that time were dealing with declining enrollment. When we were first building our budget, we had declining enrollment of over 1,600. Departments were asked to reduce by 10% that particular year. And that's kind of what you're seeing there under the round one reductions. That resulted in budget reductions of over $6.5 million. We were a little bit short. The remaining $3.5 million came out of other areas, utility savings, vacancy savings, that sort of thing. But you can see the total there. And if that wasn't bad enough, in round two, August and September of 2020, there was basically a special session in June of 2020 that reduced funding after our budgets were approved again. Another very painful time, basically mandating that we reduce our budgets again by $3.5 million. And that was after the start of the year. And so that was a kind of another painful time. So as you can see, very little budget has been returned. Departments have been directly reduced by $25 million in 7 years. They are working under bare bones conditions at this time. They only gave up, this year, they only gave up the last of any extra that they had. There is no contingency left for anything about this time outside of classroom compliance, and that is simply to keep classes within statutory limits. So that's about the only contingency that we have left. Over the past 7 years, this district has made some very deliberate and conscientious effort to keep cuts away from the classroom. And that's each and every year as much as possible. The main reason that the schools are feeling the reductions so badly for next year is because they did not see reductions in 2021, 21, 22, and now 22, 23. And a lot of that has to do with COVID. We did not want to reduce the support out in the schools. Everybody was going through a very hard time. And so, you know, you've been hearing that these reductions are for 2 years, but after poring over old documents and preparing this particular report or this particular bit of information, it dawned on me that we actually are reducing for 3 years. And so, you know, by way of example of some of the impact of a lot of these cuts, you know, finance had city center staff working over this last 3-day holiday weekend, all 3 days, simply to make deadlines. And I think that happens in a lot of different places. And maybe that's not important to everybody, but it certainly is important to me. And so, you know, this whole presentation, you've been given an awful lot of information. This process is a 6-month, year-long process, a 6-month-long process. And so, you know, it actually happens pretty consistently over the years. We always start our budget and it always focuses around the legislative session. And it always basically culminates in May for a July 1st start date. And so I think that is all that I had on my plate to talk about. Mr. Elder, did I miss any point that you?
No, ma'am, you covered it all, and thank you.
Okay.
So just so for closure here, do know that we have spoken with the secretary. We were given an extension. State statute says we have to turn this in. We can submit and continue to make modifications up until a period of time, but it's not an issue of people not wanting to give us more time or not being willing to give us more time. It's an issue of they have to review and then load these accounts, and just logistically it takes a certain amount of weeks. And if they don't get this thing soon, we will not make our July payroll, as I mentioned. I'm pretty comfortable that we'll be able to answer your questions tonight. And I think we've given you much more information than we gave you last time. As we move forward, I want to note that we will continue the right sizing process. The initial step of right-sizing budgets has provided information about where we need to focus. So we know we've got to do some work in middle school. Middle school clearly has to be an area of focus for us, which will also help us to strengthen alignment of the budget to the strategic plan as we start to point and say, okay, middle school needs some attention. How can we, what do they need? How can we do that? That will help us with that process. And again, we began looking at priorities as a district, just to get ourselves in that mindset of what you've asked for. But we also know that we need to strengthen those priorities along with the clarification of guardrails. And so with that, we're open for questions. And of course, we are asking for approval of the budget tonight.
Okay, so here we are, it's 7:10, and we all, does anyone need a break? Can we, of course, let's just take like a quick 5-minute break. We'll come back, have our questions, and then we'll go from there. And if we need to take another break, we will. But I really am hoping that we can get through this and that we can, work through this process, but take a quick break. So we'll break for 5. and everybody has refreshments. We're ready to go. So I think what I'd like to do, and we have board member Dominguez back too. Unfortunately, she's not here to enjoy our little refreshments that we have.
Maybe one.
We miss you, Josefina.
I know.
Nice too.
It'd be good to have you in the room with us for sure. I think what we'll do is, I was trying to think of the 4 questions. It would be so cool if we could just, I wish I could see the 4 questions. And maybe if we went through and, if we went through and trying to like figure out how we can structure our conversation so that we can, have an opportunity for everyone to be engaged in this. And I don't have them. Anyway, was a good idea, but I don't have them in front of me for some reason. So there we go. Okay. So I think we'll start out with like the first question that was, what is the impact to the individual school budgets? And I wonder if we could just start from there and have, if you had questions regarding like the historical school data and with the membership, the FT, the FTs with the school enrollment and the FTE changes, the staffing allocations and the school budget comparisons to that, and the program modification process that was included in that part. Did anyone have any, I know it's hard to go back and remember all that, but did you have any questions about those particular documents, or was there anything? Go ahead, Board Member Gonzalez.
I had a clarifying question. So I don't know if Mr. Hughes is still here, but it was related to the McKinley example. I did not track the explanation on that one at all. So I'm wondering if you could just sort of walk me through that again. What I'm seeing in the spreadsheet is it looks like they increased enrollment and yet lost FTEs, but I didn't understand the explanation.
Yeah, so there we go. So I did talk with the principal today and said, okay, where are we really at? What do we have? Their budget runs clean. When they jumped over 500 students, part of the allocations from the district, therefore support different aspects of that. So now they get a full-time assistant principal versus a half-time. They got a full-time librarian instead of a 0.5 librarian as well, with their numbers going up higher. So therefore, they were able to use some of their at-risk money. So they were able to buy different positions that they were looking at purchasing. So they were able to add more into that realm. The part where I got confused and kind of went into a little circle back, and I apologize, is we gave them a 0.6 last year when their increase rose in their population. And that's something that we have with our systems where we have a 20-day count where we're able to look at those numbers. And if they are out of compliance or they're in need, then we bring that to budget steering. And that's where budget steering gave an allocation to them for that. So what they were needing to add to their budget. But long story short, they're able to run. They're able to be 100% when they tumbled. They are clear and they are having their numbers ready to go. So they are staffed appropriately.
So they did increase enrollment and did also lose FTE.
No, their FTE was shifted in a way that they could then take the at-risk money that they were using for FTE and not spend it on FTE.
So when I look at column N, difference between FY21 and FY23 FTE, a difference of 1.49. So
So they were buying people that they didn't need to, they felt they needed to buy using their at-risk money. Once they didn't need to buy those people with the at-risk money, you see the shift in FTE. So the at-risk money was applied in different ways other than FTE.
But I'm sorry, I'm still not tracking. It was applied in different ways toward programs? Like,
materials, technology, accessibility. Any of those ways could have been how it was applied.
So then there was not a loss of FTE.
Well, remember this it reflects over time, so that I think there could have been a loss of FTE over time. And it all came up today. And it's not necessarily teachers, because that FTE is all FTE. So I'm not sure if it was maybe could have been a one-to-one with a special needs student who moved on to Del Norte. And so the one-to-one left. Things like that could incur. I haven't been the principal at McKinley for 6 years. It's an interesting school. It houses the deaf program, and there's a lot of interpretation services, and there's a lot of very specialized FTE that goes in there. So it could have been some impact in that type of program. But it's definitely one of the ones we looked at as an outlier and said, here's one we're probably going to have. That's the reason we selected it, was we were trying to figure out more and more about it. And so we do understand that we've got these outliers, which allows us to have the budget modification discussions. So if there was something that occurred that we inadvertently damaged or inadvertently, just took something away that had to be there, then they can put in a request for a modification. And if they justify that, then it can be put back. In this case, I'm not quite sure where it was, but that's how it looks. That's why it looks the way it looks. They're utilizing the at-risk funding, not necessarily on FTE, and then there may have been an impact in special ed.
So the explanation on the special ed specialized positions in the one-to-one makes a lot of sense. So I'll buy that one. I'm sure the rest of the description is correct also. I do have another question on just community school coordinators, because it is actually my understanding that Whittier cut their community school coordinator, McKinley cut their school community coordinator. I heard John Adams cut a community school coordinator. And so that doesn't come through in this information. It's hard to know, is that true? Is it accurate? And this, for me, is what's at the core of the questions. It's at the core of the guardrails. So if we were to think of Whittier as an example, we just recognized them at the start of the meeting for their turnaround that is that we credit to the community school coordinator, among a variety of other things. I'm just, how do we know where community school coordinators have been cut? Or is there any guarantee that all tier 3 and 4 schools will get a community coordinator? Or what is the connection between the district's value and budget here on that one?
I want to remove Whittier as a conversation because that one's incredibly unique. They had, and I don't want to upset anybody. They had a tremendous community school coordinator who passed very suddenly. And I think there was some pain in the concept of trying to replace her too soon. I'm sort of speaking for a school. I'm not totally aware, but in my conversations, that was part of it. And they wanted to apply the money elsewhere. And she had built systems that they felt they could maintain at least for a while. So I would not be surprised if down the road we saw that change, but that's a unique one. I thought there was only one middle school that I was been made aware of, and Mr. Hughes, I think it was yours, but it wasn't McKinley.
No, to answer the question on the McKinley situation, they're not a quote official community school going through all of the process. Principal Legant and his crew are working on that and trying to get there. They currently have a grant into the PED to have that to where it be district funded. They're not district funded, they're school funded on their operations that they had. They had a really good coordinator in the position. That coordinator left for the private sector. They did not fill that position. And as they went through with it, they kept to a family liaison at that point versus a coordinator is where they put their emphasis along those lines. The only one that is that was cut as a community school coordinator position from an official standpoint was that of Cleveland Middle School, in which they went through their IC. They went through where they were looking at reductions, and they had a position there that was part of that. So that was one of the aspects. That's the only middle school that I'm aware of that was on an official part of that, where, you know, if we want to talk guardrails or, you know, what is that direction, that can be something that we can address and look into. I don't know anything about John Adams. I don't believe that they've cut a coordinator there.
Yeah, I'm on the council there.
Madam President, members of the board, Superintendent Elder, I can speak directly to John Adams Middle School. Their community school coordinator is funded through next year. She's an integral part of that school community and in place moving forward at this point.
Thank you. Any other questions? I had a question. I just wanted to follow up on that because it's related to the McKinley thing. And what struck me during the conversation when we were talking, we said we added money or we did something differently with McKinley after the 20th day, which I think just demonstrated that there is a process, I guess, that we come back and we have the ability to adjust. So what I heard in this is that although the schools had made some of these decisions around this whole piece around whether it's 30, 60, or 90 days, we come back and we have they're doing adjustments with the senior, with the zone associate and making a request. Is that what's happening?
Yes, Madam President, that is correct. We could bring that back to budget steering. They have a program modification that comes through where they're looking at their schedules and they're able to come in and say, this is something that we need. And we look at that to see if it's a need or a want, and we find that there are needs, and then we're able to implement that and give the allocation for the school to operate.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions on this first section? Go ahead, Barbara.
I guess this is the best place to ask it. I would like more information about the district managed positions and what the criteria is for those positions. And that's probably a place where I have a follow-up about the community school coordinator also. But anyway, what is the criteria for district managed? And I know it must differ from position to position. I mean, a school with an SES program might need more counselors, or some programs might really need an extra nurse. There are certain things I understand, but there seem to be a lot of district managed positions. And so I wonder about that. And then I wonder about what kind of position that puts that individual in terms of who are they answerable to? Who's their boss? Because they need to have relationships at the school level. So I would like some clarification.
Board Member Peterson, we need clarification from you. What is a district managed person?
So on the staffing plan, school year 2022, 2023, that starts off with administrators for elementary school, 0 to 499 is 1.0 FTE. Kindergarten teachers, all of those are state mandates for class size. I know special ed staff is largely governed by a combination of state and federal statute. But music teacher, art teacher, counselors, nurse, health assistant, custodian, special ed staff, all of those are listed as district managed.
Right. So just letting my people know, she's looking at the staffing plan. And there is a number of things like music teachers, art teachers. What does that mean? It means that the district places them. But counselors, really, once they're placed, they're there. It's just they're initially assigned by the district. Most of these, like nurses, you made the point. So sometimes a school will have a nurse, but it'll have a special needs population. I had this at Highland where I had 2 nurses, and one was in the nurse's office and one was not. One was in back area with a very specialized population where she had to be there to provide help with feeding tubes, diapering, just all the various issues that popped up. Again, custodians are assigned by the district. Not all special education staff is district managed, but that could be our like our SES programs. That could be the programs where we place, very specialized programs on campus where we have to hub resources. So that means district managed in terms of the formula. Band and orchestra teachers, all these they're placed based on formulas, and they're all kind of different. Like a custodian is placed based on square footage of a school. What we know is that as we continue to grow the schools, though, we have a very difficult time finding the funding to hire more custodians. And then on top of that, we have a very difficult time finding more custodians. So they're all, I think the word district managed was put there because each of them has a different formula for why they're placed. But once they're there, then processes kick in as far as their human rights, their human resource rights, and how they can move from site to site. I think that's what you're asking.
Right. I really just wanted to know the criteria, like how do you decide how many counselors and where they're placed? And because it says district managed, does that mean that the school just gets whoever gets placed there? What role, what relationship do they have with school administration?
Schools pick their own counselors, but the district establishes how many counselors they can have.
Okay.
Based on enrollment?
Enrollment, based on the number enrollment,
So
yeah.
That formula would be.
The formula is 400 to 450. Yeah, I think it's somewhere between 400 to 450 students per counselor.
Yeah, because I think that's one of those roles where when we talked about guardrails, this is true of counselors and nurses, both. Regardless of size of the school, you cannot predict when a student's in crisis. You can't predict when there's a broken bone on the playground. There are certain positions that it seems like regardless of the size of the school, there needs to be always coverage, and then more coverage for a larger school. And so do we have those kinds of guardrails?
Well, as you know, and you know this, we do try to have a nurse at every school. But there are some cases where, because the number of nurses we've had to split them. So when we've had to split them, we try to put a health assistant there. So there is some coverage, somebody who's had some training that can make a decision in conjunction with the school administration and how to best to care for the student. When we have students with very special medical needs, very often there are nurses assigned specifically to attend to those needs. So yes, and I will say that based with the related service sites, so providers, they have some input on where they end up as well.
Okay. And back to I guess this is more of an editorial comment that we need to figure out how to create consistency, especially thinking about community school coordinators. It takes time to develop those kinds of relationships. It takes time to develop an effective counsel that's more than just superficial in the life of the school. And it's real hard. Schools are put in horrible decision-making process when they have to use the same budget for a reading intervention teacher or a community school coordinator. And So that's sort of a long-term effort combined with the legislature and the feds. But it's one that I think we need to keep in mind for lobbying efforts and such. Because it doesn't work to open up and close down. It doesn't accomplish its need. And then it looks like community schools don't work because there hasn't been the kind of consistent long-term investment in developing it. That's all though.
Okay, go ahead, Board Member Jackson.
So I have a very specific question on 1A, the enrollment and FTE. So I turned the data that you gave us into percentages. So my question is, if I look at Hubert Humphrey Elementary School, and these are just examples, but Hubert Humphrey Elementary School, the percentage that I calculated of students they lost was 2%. They lost 2%. But the percentage of FTEs that they lost was 6.73%. So then if I go to SY Jackson, they, from my calculations, lost 11% of students, but their FTEs they lost 5%. So my question is, the percentage of FTEs that were lost between those two schools were comparable, but the percentage of students that were lost were larger. So what was the justification that SY Jackson lost more students than Hubert Humphrey did, and yet their FTEs didn't change very much?
Sure. So you that's an interesting formula you tried to apply. You can't, the ratio for FTE by grade level is not the same. So it depends on where the loss was. Was it in kindergarten? Was it in fifth grade? The ratio is different. So when the population shift, if there was a loss in fifth grade, it would be those classes are a little bit larger versus the kindergarten classes. So you're trying to apply a percentage there. That's very difficult because the ratios on the grade levels are different.
And it could also be associated with just the number of special populations as well, correct? Because if they
I
had.
don't know that I would say again, now someone, okay, Tammy, do you want to try to jump in on but everybody wants to, oh, now you've done it. Everybody's on the screen now, Miss Jackson. So everybody wants to jump in.
Ms. Coleman, I fear as though I have created a new nightmare situation for you, very similar to FY17. So for that, I apologize. So even if we take away the percentages that I used, the difference between FY21 and 23 were comparable, but the amount of students lost was larger. So
Mr. Superintendent and Board Member Jackson, one thing that you really have to look at for SY Jackson, when I'm looking at that, they crossed the threshold of 500 students. And if you look at our staffing formulas, 500 students is the threshold for more or less resources for quite a few different areas. For like, your administrators. Let's see what else. This is
because they're at 499, so that bumps them to the 500.
Yes.
Half administrator and a half librarian.
Yes, drops them down below. So, because of things like this, you really can't use straight percentages. I mean, you can use it for some analysis, but there's so much more behind all of these, numbers. So, but that's one story. That's that particular school's story as far as that goes.
Okay.
And please remember, we'll do compliance reviews both in the fall and the spring. So if there are issues with staffing or, if our population pops and we need to bring more staff on, we'll make every attempt to do that. But at this point, we are where we are. But so it's not just the total number, it's also when you hit those magical thresholds that have impacts as well.
Okay. No, thank you. That helps with the understanding. And then I'll save my next question for slide 2.
Board Member Mule-Aragon, do you have some questions on this?
So then, just so that I can just make it like as easy for me as possible. So the percentage of the decreased enrollment is not going to equate to the same percentage of decrease in FTEs, because it's going to just depend on the at-risk funding or who that, like you just said, they went above 500. So then that means they're going to get an extra staff person. So when we're trying to explain that to the public, that's how we have to, every school's just going to look totally differently.
Based on enrollment.
There's going to be some similarities. I mean, they're pretty remarkably close, but there's some that just sort of jump out at you and say, okay, this is weird. So one thing you can't do is you can't compare elementary to mid to high, because the ratios are so wildly different, right? And then even in the elementary, because the grade levels have different ratios, even that's tricky on a percentage basis. And then you have to look at the school and say, okay, what kind of specialized programs do they have? Because some schools do have a very high student to pupil ratio because they have such specialized programs.
Chaparral.
There's a whole bunch of them. Everybody's got them. You all have those schools. So, but yeah, it's understanding the school story. And so part of the budget optimization process is to help the district work with the school through that story and talk about what are the things that have to be hit specific to the Yazzie Martinez, specific to programs. How do we do that work?
And what I would just like to understand, like for my schools, it's hard to, go through 143 schools, but like I would like to just sit down with somebody and just have them go through like my schools. So, because that's who I have to answer to. So that would be helpful to me, because I know I did the same thing that Madam Secretary did when it came to trying to figure out the percentages. But now that you explained, I'm kind of going, well, Volcano Vista obviously saw an increase in enrollment, but then their FTEs increase much more than the increase in their enrollment. So I think that kind of, would help me to know a little bit more about, that school. And then I don't know if anybody knows this or not, when it comes to some of the electives at my 2 schools, and I've heard more from Volcano Vista High School, do you know, or does anybody, maybe Mr. Bell does, know anything about some of those electives that may have been cut? Or hopefully not, but.
Let's see. Yeah, Madam President, members of the board, and Board Member Montoya, I can certainly address it. I do know for sure there was one program that was impacted, and I believe that was.
Is that the graphics class or something?
Well, that's actually another issue not related to staffing or cutting. That was
related to computers or something, right?
Yes. So in terms of the information from Volcano Vista, they are not cutting any electives. They have realigned and made adjustments to the electives where programs did not make classes that had more than 16 students. And in previous years, they might have been able to run an elective class that had 16 or fewer students. But this year they just did not have the FTE to do that. So their threshold for making an elective, and luckily many of their elective teachers are duly endorsed, so they did not lose any elective teachers in this process this year.
Okay, well, that's good. So is it just the case across the board now that electives have to have at least 16 students at the high school level for it to be a course that's offered?
I can sort of address that question as a former curriculum assistant and as a former high school principal. Board Member Mueller-Aragon, it is a typical 15 or 16 threshold is kind of depending on the year, and it does kind of depend year to year, and what you can afford with the FTE that you are given. And then thinking of that maximum, you know, for high school in the electives being 35 or 36, as long as they don't exceed 160 students per day. So it's a nice sort of guide. And sometimes you can, for example, I remember making an AP calculus course with 6 students, and we decided, the instructional council and I decided that that was well worth the dollars being spent to meet the needs of those students.
And that's what I think we need to make sure that we're looking at, that what electives are being done away with. That would be important for me to have an idea historically what's happened to some electives. So that would be something that I would just be interested in knowing. And then when I was just looking at the schools that had increased enrollment, I just think it's something that we need to kind of look at. So many of them were like schools of choice. And so I think maybe there's something we could learn. There was only, I think, 18 schools that increased enrollment, and there was like 125 where the enrollment was decreased. And I know the children aren't there, but we can always learn from some of these schools of choice and what they're doing to, and E Academy was, you know, phenomenal, because I'm sure of what we went through the last couple of years. And so let me see if that's all I have on that question. That might be it. And then if also, just to kind of go back to Member Peterson's, if it comes to what the formula is, I know that we're asked that, I think often, is when do we get a music teacher? How many students do we need? You know, why did we lose a counselor? So I know that Scott had said that with counselors, it's 400 to 450 students equates to a counselor. So if we kind of had an idea about what those formulas were for music, art, counselors, nurse, health assistant, custodians, et cetera, that would be helpful as well. But I think that might be all I have on that first question.
Board Member Tapia Romero, do you have any?
I am good.
You're good. Okay. All right. Well, then let's start with you. We'll go to, oh, well, I guess I asked my questions in there, so I'm good. So what was question number 2? Board Member Jackson she's acting as an awesome secretary.
More than just a pretty face. What is the impact of the school-based cuts to the identified areas of Yazzie Martinez? And the specific documents are 2A, which is the at-risk expenditures, and 2B, which is the budget optimization handout with graphs.
So we'll start with Miss Board Member Tapia Romero, if you have any questions on that, or did you have any?
So when we're obviously, you know, hold on, let me pull it up. I had it. And I just closed it to go back to the question. Okay, so when we break down each school, you know, and obviously who gets Title I money and things of that sort, how much input did, I guess, all the principals truly have in, you know, deciding what was going to be needed for their schools? Was it, you know, were they actively part of the conversations? How often were these conversations had, you know? Because I think back to even, and I feel like we use the comparison for the math curriculum all the time, but the math curriculum, I remember you guys gave us lengthy notes and surveys of the feedback that we got from teachers for the math curriculum. Curious if we have anything like that too from the principals, you know, when they had to give their input on their own school budgets.
So as I say, is in the budgets themselves, they talk about the justification for their spending. Is that sort of what you're asking about? Is how they explained why they were spending the money the way they were?
Right. Like I think of John Adams, for example. That's one of my schools where they now the principal and assistant principal are both having to teach a class because they lost, you know, FTEs in there. And trying to realize like, were they able to even, be part of the conversation to say, hey, here's the positions that we need to save going forward? And how much of their input was really taken, or saying like, here's the numbers and you guys have to work with them.
Dr. Gonzalez, I'll let you.
Madam President, Member Tapio Romero, Superintendent Elder, John Adams is a good example that I have off the top of my head in regards to the input. So I think it's tiered input. One of the arenas for the input begins at the budget optimization meeting with the different departmental people involved to kind of critically be friends in terms of, have you thought about doing it this way? What do you think about maximizing your budget that way? To kind of gives the synergy in the room some momentum to kind of build their budget. They're going to walk away and they'll do some adjusting and such. And in the case of John Adams specifically, they've had a decline in enrollment over the last 3 years or better. And they've also have a significantly large special education district hub within their school. So they have different dynamics on top of a community school identity and a dual language identity. They're trying to meet the different subgroups within Yazzie Martinez. Most recently, the principal, Mr. Merhej, and I have had a conversation about what would you need to kind of get at some of the concerns that you still have even after, and this is the second area of input, the spring compliance comparison. Comparing the 80th day when they were budgeted December 1st to the 120th day, was there a growth in enrollment? If there was, compliance will always prevail. We will make sure they're funded to compliance. If they're still below that, so they're funded at compliance, that's where the budget modification comes in. And that's where the burden is on me with the justification from the principal to go before the budget steering committee and defend a justification for an additional 0.4 FTE in the case of John Adams Middle School. Those are the two classes that you're referencing that the principal and assistant principal right now are scheduled to teach. So that's a pretty in-depth, in the weeds example to that school. And I would just end by saying that there's different stages of input the principal has as we go toward the first bell of the school year ringing in August.
Yeah, and I believe, and thank you for that, Dr. Gonzalez. And I asked a lot of these because I'm, unlike, I don't know how it was before, but I have been very active in my schools, and, they invite now, and and maybe because we're all new and we're all giddy to get in there and, be involved. And I walk into schools, and John Adams was my own middle school, and walking into it and seeing that even it hasn't changed from 30 years ago. No lie, I'm not exaggerating one bit, to where it's at today. It broke my heart. And then I have the principal coming in, honestly, I'm trying to be so careful because I don't want to feel like he's like, oh shoot, I told her something, and I don't want him to, have any type of repercussions. But he's like, our gym is leaking. Our whole, school is falling apart. I'm teaching a class. And to not have any type of solution for him, I leave the campus. Most of the campuses I've left with eager and excitement and feeling really great about what just took place. When I left John Adams, I left heavy-hearted and really just broken for the kids, and seeing that they were not having the same, opportunities that I was seeing at other campuses across the board. And again, I'm just telling you, it's the school from 30 years ago when I was in middle school there. It's the only thing that changed now is we have fences and we have an intense security system to get in, and you have to be buzzed in. But other than that, nothing has been updated. And it's hard when principals are telling me that they're having to work in classrooms, so I think you've heard me say that again. And I always I want to ensure that principals are having an active say so, not just do as I'm told, and expect just to follow from, the top down, but they're the ones having to live this every single day and to really be that support for their staff. And, I want to ensure that that's happening, because again, I hear it, But then when I'm in the school, it seems like there's a disconnect.
And John Adams looks like it did when I was in school, and I'm way older than Crystal. It looks the same as when I was there in the 70s, when I've been there to go help out at the campus. It looks exactly the same.
Well, and that's a different conversation, I think, in terms of our capital outlay and some of the concerns that we have with some of our aging structures. I think public schools just as a whole, the whole aging structure piece is huge. I don't know if you guys have ever seen the gym at Ernie Pyle. It's like, but and I know that our middle schools have come up as a place that we do want to put some other emphasis on, especially around the capital piece. But in terms of was your question answered, board member, in terms of like the participation and how that optimization process was held with that principal for the conversation? Because what I heard from Dr. Gonzalez is that there is awareness that this is where we're starting, but as the school year is getting ready and we're going to go in based on what enrollment's going to look like, there's an advocacy structure and piece in place where he, as the zone associate, is also going to be looking for resources so that we can make sure that that's not going to be the case.
Right. And I guess I want to, and I'm trying my hardest to stay on topic too, because I don't want to rabbit hole into other stuff. Just know that these conversations, like, again, because we got a ton of documentation from teachers before when they needed their input, but we never saw the input from principals about what they needed from their school, what programs were they advocating for, what were the non-negotiables. I feel like we never got that deep into it. And I know you guys probably never had to get this deep before. We ask a whole different set of questions, but I just want to ensure that they're getting what they need.
The principals have a number of ways to put input into their budget, and I feel pretty comfortable that the associates are doing their part to listen to them. We've actually had to, at times, sort of tame the associates a bit, saying, look, we understand what you're asking for, but we're at a point now, and this is a hard year. I continue to tell you, this is the hardest year we've ever been through. You are an extraordinary time. It's not your questions that's the issue. You're fine to ask the questions. It's that the principals are going through things they've not had to go through before. Okay. And it will work out. And yes, they have that's why we have the forms and the opportunity to apply for modifications to your budget. Sometimes the answer is yes, but sometimes the answer is no. Because we're at a point now, like we keep saying, we're not taking from a giant pot of money. If I'm going to give you something, then it means I'm not giving this person something. And that's where we're getting to. So, but I think you see when you look at the at-risk funding, you see that those schools that have the highest need, the money's going there. And that's reflective in the details here. So.
Okay, are you good?
Yeah.
I'm going to go down. Board Member Jackson, we'll go to you next.
Yay. Okay, so I have a question on both the at-risk expenditures and the budget optimization. Would you like me to choose one and then you'll come back, or do you want me to?
You just go for it. Go for it.
Okay, so I'll
after you, I'm going to go to Board Member Dominguez, just so that you know, because I haven't forgotten her online.
Okay, so I'm going to continue with the budget optimization discussion because I too feel as though kind of my role up here is to maybe give voice to those who don't have the ability to speak up. And so I was also told that the optimization process was maybe not optimal, that the process was begun only after the budget had been presented to the schools. And so that concerns me. And I think some of my comments are best practices moving forward. So I'll preface that, but if the budget optimization process is going to work the way we have been discussing it, then that process needs to start prior to the budgets being presented to the schools. Because what I heard then happened was the budgets were the budgets were presented at the same time as the budget optimization tool, but then almost as soon after that, as the principals are working through the budget optimization tool, HR is already coming in and removing staff from the schools. And I think part of what this whole nightmare process is that the communication to the principals as to what was going to happen was not defined early on. And so I think it was a little shocking that they're trying to work through this budget optimization tool, and yet HR has already come in and kind of started making decisions for them. One way it was described to me was, you were told it was going to be bad, you knew it was going to be bad, but you didn't realize you were walking into a house and it was going to explode around you. So I think that, again, moving forward, we have to work on our communication with our principals and our school leaders, because they're the face of the school. When the parents hear, you know, there's going to be a cut at the school, they go to the principal first. And so the principal needs to know how that process is going to work. So I understand that there is a tool, and I think it was very good. I'm hearing it wasn't delivered in the most ideal circumstance. So,
Well, Board Member Jackson, I can't speak to individual circumstances, and I'm sure there's people that didn't like the way it was done. We didn't like doing it. Just a couple things though. We started the process of talking about budget cuts in August. So any principal that says, I didn't realize it was going to be bad, and I was very brutally honest, just like I was brutally honest with you guys when you came on in January and said, here comes something that you never saw coming, but this, and I told them this is like nothing we've ever been through. Secondly, it's like nothing we've ever been through. They had to do something that no principal before them has had to do. We've all had to cut people. We've all had to let people go, but not at this scale, not at this sequence. No teachers were removed. Nobody was moved until after the budgets were turned in. And as far as the budget optimization tool, we can sort of look at how to do that better. I'm not opposed to that. I don't know how they would have optimized unless they knew what their budget was. But I understand, you know what I mean? They don't know what they're going to have to do. And we didn't know what they're going to have to do until we actually received the money. And one of the things that's really hard on these budgets is the schools have a very tight turnaround. It's not like because of the budgets we get funded January, February, right? So if it's a 60-day session, man, they got to turn it around pretty quick. So those are hard. But I have no issue with sitting down with you guys as we move forward and saying, what can we do better? How can we improve the process? And if that's something that'll improve it, okay.
Yeah, because I think that the optimization questions are very good. And I think, and again, don't shoot the messenger.
No,
this is what I and others have been told.
Of course.
So,
of course. I've been told things too.
Yeah.
So I understand.
Oh, I'm sure.
I understand.
So I would like to see that process streamlined. The other so here's an actual question instead of comment. How come there is no principal representation on the budget steering committee?
That has been something that we have discussed over the years. We're contemplating it. There were some issues with confidentiality in the past. And it was something that were there. And then there were some things that happened that put principals in a position that maybe they shouldn't have been. And information was released that shouldn't have been released, and it's caused some concerns in the past. And that's come up to the APSPA multiple times, and we continue to discuss it with them, and we continue to try to figure out a way to do it that allows us some control. And I know the principals are interested in that, but it's a significant lift on top of an already significant job. But we're in conversations about it. That's not something, but there's been some issues with that in the past.
Mhm. Well, and I think, with your focus on creating principal leadership, I think that would be, there would be a significant overture to include principals on the budget steering committee in some capacity because of the way the optimization tool is working. So again, maybe a best practice as we move forward is to see something like that. Okay, and I think my third question. Actually, you want to move and then I'll come back.
Okay. Okay. Board Member Dominguez, I promise to go to you online.
Okay, so I'm not going to belabor this. I wanted to ask the others, did you get your questions answered? And even if not entirely, we're in a situation where, we're back to the math adoption situation. I'm not interested in holding up checks for the hardest working majority in this district. However, and I stand by that. I'm very concerned about the disconnect between the narrative I'm getting tonight and the narratives that I get. I delivered gold bars and met a lot of people. and I think the two things that keep coming up for me is that we need a system of collaboration and a system of transparency. Superintendent Elder, you say that you did cryptically warn us that things were going to be bad. But what that looked like was nebulous. And I suspect it was nebulous for principals as well. They had no idea what that meant. So, and that gets to the issue of transparency. And there's got to be a different system for doing this. And a more collaborative system as well. I mean, yes, there's going to be more bad news next year too. We've talked about school closures, and I hope that we can get that topic on the table right away so we're not holding people, including the board, in this cryptic nebula, for lack of a better word. I just think it's time for a systemic, collaborative effort at all of this. I have no doubt that it is hard for Ms. Tammy Coleman and her staff to have to crunch these numbers and deliver these messages for everybody. And I'm proposing that we call the vote, because I'm not so sure that we're going to get, I mean, it's been very enlightening. But I suspected when I was calculating percentages and discrepancies, I would refer back to the at-risk spreadsheet. And that kind of told me why there was a discrepancy in FTEs. So I don't know how much more information we can get to satisfy us. For me, the issue is one of collaboration and a more transparent process that we can work on to make this less cryptic and less of a shock. And that collaboration has got to, I'm with board member Jackson. I think principals have a role to play. And when you say that you had a process whereby principals sat on budget committee meetings, but information got out, well, I would say, so what? I mean, it speaks to the issue of transparency, I think. And I'll let you know right now, we need to approve. I feel like we need to approve this budget because we can't hold it. I don't want PED involved. I think we've got it down. What PED and the LFC need to hear are lots of these details that emerged. I think board member Peterson made a suggestion.
So board member Dominguez, are you making a motion?
I'm making a motion that we just not belabor this, that we vote.
Do I have a second? And then we can still have discussion, but I just want, do we have a second?
I will second, but I do want board member Dominguez and myself to have the chance to ask our questions.
We can go on with further discussion. Board member Dominguez, do you have some other questions that you need to ask, or are you?
No, I just, and if it helps for the other board members to hear that we can ask that this budget process start as soon as the June 20th. Is it June 20th when the big deadline is, the final deadline is?
I believe so.
I don't
Well,
know
we
that
can start-
anything is written in statute. I looked and I didn't find anything about a drop dead date, that was all up to the secretary. So it's up to one person to decide about that.
But we
Okay.
do know that a budget does
Have the
need to begin on July 1st because these are
Right.
state funds. So there does need to be a process whereby a budget is approved so that it can get into a process, a formal process, so that monies can actually be approved, moved, and
People paid.
delivered. Yes, so, and July 1 is the start date on these state funds.
And so what I'm offering is that we vote with the understanding that we need a new process. And that we have expectations. And I'll let the other board members, help define that. But for me, it's the big C, collaboration.
Thank you, board member Dominguez. Board member Peterson.
I'll try not to belabor the point, but I think the bottom line is we are not funded the way we need to be by the legislature. I mean, whether you're at La Cueva and Hubert Humphrey, or whether you're at Los Padillas and Lou Wallace, and I look at my schools, and probably over half of the schools that qualify for a family income index are in my district. Those are my kids, and they're the ones who are not getting what they need. And to put those schools in a position where they have to decide between a reading intervention teacher and a community school coordinator is not right. I mean, that's where the heart of equity is can we fund these schools in a way that they need? The catch is we never really know what our budget is until the end of the legislative session. So, I mean, I think that as a board, we keep moving forward with the strategic plan. We keep working at putting processes in place, but there's nothing that's going to guarantee that we don't go through this every year, because we don't find out the damn budget until the middle of February or the middle of March. That's just the reality that we're in. So I think what schools have to do is learn to really collaboratively be able to articulate what they need the money for, why, and what that looks like for their community when they have it and when it doesn't. And so I think that there's a lot of work that needs to be done, and we have a lot on our plates, but our right sizing right now means right sizing to the same insufficient level that we've had in the past. And that's what the right sizing comes down to. So I mean, I could go on. There are certainly there are details that I could add to, but I'm in spirit with Board Member Dominguez about we do this and we figure out how to do it better next time, including the communication, the collaboration, and the planning part.
Thank you. Board Member Gonzalez?
I do have questions still on the impact for Yazzie Martinez students. And when I asked the question that is question 1 around what was the impact in school for schools, Scott, you clarified, what do you mean by that? And I said budget, FTEs, and programs. And I feel like we got budgets and FTEs. We didn't fully get programs, but I also feel like I'm missing information in terms of things like electives. And so as an example, we say that we care about art. We say that we care about music. We say that we care about leadership and JROTC and choir and band and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And those are the things that are cut. So for me, this whole exercise was not to be mean, was not to take away anyone's Memorial Day weekend. I am very sorry that that happened. I really appreciate all of the work that everyone did. But the purpose of the questions was to know that I am voting on a budget that is a statement of our values. And I still do not feel that I have the information to know that this is a budget that represents the values of the APS community. I think it's our obligation as elected officials to know that information. It's our obligation as community leaders to know that information, to prioritize those things. And so for me, I would love to have a scenario in which we could actually have a budget workshop or have actually looked at information and made decisions, made changes together. In fact, I was hopeful that we could have some of that information and we could decide that we could maybe prioritize from column A to column B, or from the wealthiest schools to the most at risk or most needy schools. I still don't feel that we have that information. So I understand the process. I understand the timeline. I understand the ability to make changes. And so that's fine. It is what it is. I don't feel like I'm fulfilling my obligation as an elected board member with the information in front of me.
Well, Board Member Gonzalez, as far as the school budget program, we were able to give you the total numbers. You're right, a breakdown of each school was going to be problematic just in terms of the time commitment. We keep talking about electives, and I think it's important to note the middle school level is probably the area that had the greatest impact on electives. So however, let's see, we have 27 middle schools and I believe one alternative middle school. So we had 25 elective course adjustments across the district. All right, so we can recognize moving forward that we're going to have to look at middle schools and really see why that happened. And when I tried to dig in, it's real hard. I mean, sometimes it's like, well, they lost a 0.5 PE teacher. And so they're going to have a hard time working with eighth graders who need physical education and health because there's some of the requirements for middle school. Some of them were, they lost a family and consumer science position. So they're all different. There's nothing that really, I don't think there was any, you can't point to one program and say, well, we lost, all the PE went away. That's not what happened. Where I see that they made efforts is they tried to keep efforts to keep things like bilingual programs intact. They made efforts to keep programs that had real solid programs. So I'm looking at one middle school. He wrote, I lost an elective and a science teacher. So I think probably the teacher was split between two disciplines. He could probably do both. So he lost an FTE and that's the issue. Again, we can go back now that we've got the work done. And if we need to look at compliance, if he can't keep his numbers down, it's really tricky at the middle school and the high school because those kids rotate between classes, right? Elementary, you're not going to see the impact on electives. You just don't. They don't have that many, right? They're all sort of self-contained. High school, you didn't see the same impact. Really was middle school. So what we know coming out of this is that middle school is an area of focus. It's an area we need to work on anyways. But I wish and a lot of them, they cut administrative staff, which has an impact, right? Because the teacher evaluations become more difficult, the amount of time that you need to spend in there working with them. So you kind of see a variety of answers. And one of the reasons we're a little hesitant to share everything, and part of it is because we just couldn't get it together quickly enough, but part of it is it puts you in an odd position of saying, well, why did this principal do this and this principal did that? I like what this principal did, but I'm not so sure I like what this principal did. And that's not necessarily, I think, the role of the board necessarily. That's why I think moving forward, when we say, let's reconfigure middle school, let's really look at it. And you want to put in guardrails and say, okay, I consider we have some sort of wheel where they get to have 4 electives, that's the discussion we need to have going forward. And we can try to figure out why these impacts occurred the way they did. The reality is, I think, and I don't know this, and my research people are probably going to roll over and call me names tomorrow, but we have an issue in middle school with people leaving. For whatever reason, that's one of the transition grade from 5th to 6th, big impact. And I think that's why you see middle school kind of get the hit it got this year. But I do think as we begin to emphasize some of the things you're suggesting for middle school, you can improve that. And that's something we need, and we recognize that need. So our budget priority will have to shift. But again, you're right. What do you take from? You take from the wealthier schools who have no title money and very little to do, or maybe maybe the title schools are the wealthier schools. And so we take from them to give to the others. I don't know. And that's where that's when we were trying to deal with the impact of the pandemic and the reality of trying to balance a budget that was really being right-sized, there was just very problematic details. So moving forward, I think what you're advising us to do is have that conversation. And I think we can look, and now we have the data and we can put it in a format that you guys can have input on that without getting down into some of the nitty-gritty.
Okay. And I just want to say, it's like so complicated because part of what I was looking at when I look at it just in its entirety, and we're talking about right sizing, and we're talking about schools having all the right kind of electives, the right kind of programming that we need to have. I mean, we need to be really honest with ourselves too, that we're also trying to support really small schools too. And when you look at those formulas in terms of if you hit this threshold, you get this, you get that, you have all these additional staff that also can kick in and support a school in a different way. And with that comes a lot of leverage too. And so I think that's also really what we're plagued with. I mean, I think it's just knowing that the enrollment in some of these schools is also hurting them. I think Board Member Jackson, you had that example with the two schools that you were looking at, SY, what was it? Hubert Humphrey and SY Jackson, right?
Yeah.
I was at Jackson? Yeah. So, but looking at those two schools, and it's like that threshold and the cutoff and what that happens to staffing and what happens overall. I mean, and that's what I see. And then it goes back to what Board Member Peterson is saying too, is that it even gets exacerbated more when you're in a community where the at-risk index goes up and you have these schools that are so small too, or can't really meet that threshold and you can't get those extra pieces in. So it's kind of like we're in this weird space because I think as a board, we have a lot of work to do. I mean, we have work to do, but we also have to, I think we have to give ourselves a little bit of grace here, 5 months as a board together, and we've got a budget that's due. And we also are kind of faced with this whole issue of declining enrollment. I think we all heard it. I don't think we were all prepared for how it really was going to impact coming down to the end of what did it mean? I kind of was like thinking, yeah, I think we're going to lose some staff and we're going to see some cuts. And I just didn't, even with all the years that I've been here, I just didn't expect it to be kind of at this level. So I think we're kind of in this weird spot. I think the recommendations that you've heard tonight in terms of ways that we can improve our process, but I also just want to say to recommend to us as board members is that, we need to think about how budget sort of leads all of our subcommittees as well. And how does that play into some of the work that we're doing as board members when we're thinking about policy, when we're thinking about accountability and instruction, capital outlay, all of those things. And so we need to have that in the back of our mind. And tonight, if anything, has been a really strong orientation for all of us in terms of like where we are right now, what the budget is looking like for each of our schools and what is happening there. I've seen like our sites, the site budgets, because Ms. Coleman's team has often provided that for us. When on that executive summary, we've been able to look at it by our districts. I did that same exercise for myself with the information you gave me. I created my own tables for my district and sort of looking and seeing what that would mean. And I was trying to look at it, through all of those lenses of like percentages and staffing patterns. But, tonight was really helpful for me because I did learn a lot more too about, a school site is a school site too. So we have 143 school sites, and each of those budgets are individual budgets as well, because it's based on what makes up that particular school population. And there are things that, get sort of quantified in different ways. And although we use these same formulas, it doesn't apply the same way to all of the schools either, because now on top of that, we've got Title I, Title II, and we've got the Family Index. We've got all these other funds that come in and support the schools in different ways. So, I mean, obviously for us, it's like really staying close to this whole piece too. We monitor the schools on 30, 60, and 90 days, but I want to know what we monitor for those. And that needs to be part of our agenda on the board, so that we're looking at that as well. And we're looking at that in terms of what does it mean for the budget, what kind of adjustments were being made, and at least being aware of those processes as we're going along. So I really appreciate all of the conversation that we've had tonight and, what's come together. There's obviously still some questions. It's like Board Member Dominguez said so well, I think with this board, we could probably come up with 10 more questions, but that's not going to be helpful to the process where we are tonight. I think we need to, there is a motion on the table. There is a second. And Go ahead. Oh, yes, go ahead, Board Member Mueller. I thought you had, so I'm sorry.
I have no, I didn't. So the questions that I have about the impact to students and Yazi Martinez. So Scott, when it comes to, this at-risk funding, the Title I, the Family Income Index, et cetera. So the 4 factors that were for at-risk funding were SES, mobility, ELL, and enrollment. So I was looking at the numbers from the different schools that had the highest at-risk funding. And so it was Academy, obviously with the most, and then New Futures was, I think, second, and Freedom was third, and then I think Rio Grande and School on Wheels, and it went down. Volcano, Cibola were, in like the top 10. So when you're deciding on those 4 factors, when I'm looking at the 2 schools that were in the top 10 for at-risk funding, and I'm looking at Volcano and Cibola, is it because we don't obviously have a lot of ELLs and we don't have high mobility, and our SES is pretty, it's not really low. So is it equally given to all 4 of those factors when you're deciding about that at-risk funding?
Julianne, I'm going to have you give the ratios.
Thank you, Madam President, members of the board. It's not a weighting by factor. Okay. It's more of a, for example, if you take a school, they will have a percentage of SES and a percentage of mobility and a percentage of English language learners. Those 3 factors get added together, and then we multiply that number by the enrollment to get number of units. And then we add up all the units for all the schools, and we assign a pro rata number to each school, if that makes sense. And then that pro rata number then gets applied to the dollars. So there is not a certain weight assigned to each factor. It's just the factors themselves. Does that help at all?
It's a math problem.
Yeah, if you just send me the math problem.
Okay.
I'm visual, so if I could just see it, that would probably, because I was just looking at them and I just said it just kind of didn't make sense to me with some of the schools. With others it did. And then others that I thought should have were not, they weren't getting $1 million or whatever. And I understand that enrollment is different at different schools, but I was just looking at, some of the high schools that had similar enrollment. So that was just confusing for me. But if you could just send me that math problem.
Board Member Mueller-Aragon, if I may also add that this particular formula is largely based on the formula that the state uses in our state equalization guarantee.
So it's similar?
It's very, very similar to the SEG factor that we get funded on as a district. There's some slight differences, but that really is what it's based on.
Okay. Because that's easy to look at and figure out. I was just trying to figure it out myself and go, oh, how much do I give to SES and to enrollment, et cetera. And so then the other thing that I just want to also say that I heard some of the same things that Member Jackson and I don't know if other members had heard as well about making sure that you took input from schools before the budget was given to them, and that they didn't, and maybe it's just a miscommunication and they didn't feel that that was what happened. And so we need to make sure, like Member Dominguez says, that we have a process that does happen, because they should be able to say, before they say, here's the budget, oh, well, what can they do then? So I think that we need to hear from them before the budget is given to them. I think that's really quite important. And then just something that I think is kind of important when I was just trying to look up about, budgets and what we're supposed to do according to statute and rules and regulations, et cetera. I mean, we're dealing with this really, $1.93 billion budget, and our enrollment is probably at, what is it at, Scott? What is the enrollment that we're?
3,000
73?
roughly.
Okay, so we're at like about 73,000 students. And so we're looking at like 26,000 per student with operational and capital. And so, we need to know and make sure that our constituents are happy about how we're, building this budget, because that is large, and that's a lot of money per student. You could send your child to, if we would give them the money to academy. So, and we often hear that, it's 11,000 per student, but I never like to insult our taxpayers to say that, because we couldn't operate a school district without the capital, without the buildings. So I never will insult them, because they are paying for all of this. And the thing that we are trying to approve a budget that one of our most important jobs, and the public is financing this. So we need to make sure that we're clear in our process, and that we really do have input, and that they have input, and the schools have input, and that we are able, as a board, we matter, we were elected to represent the people. And so what I found is that if we don't, there is no date written in statute anywhere about when our budget has to get put in, except before July 1st, obviously, but there's nothing there. And that basically is left up to the secretary, who can decide about what that date is. And that's not something that I think should happen at all, because we were elected, and we should also control the information, and it shouldn't just be the secretary. But I think it's really important that I was looking over the statute 22-8-6, and it might be something that we really look over, because they've really expanded it from 2018, and there are just so many questions in there. And yes, the department will prepare the budget for our district, and I know I don't want that to happen either, though I don't feel comfortable at all voting for something that I don't feel that the principals and the public and the board really had the input, and that we are really funding what we really treasure. And I'm uncomfortable, and I hope that we do make the process more transparent, as Member Dominguez said. But I want everybody to know we won't be insolvent, and we won't close our doors. That was maybe a fear tactic, but that's not going to happen. So to all of you who parents might have been scared, that's not happening. But let's do better. I think we can.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm sorry, Board Member Milagón. I thought I had gone through all of the membership. And so what we, Board Member Jackson, while you were out, there was a motion and a second on the table. And what we're noting is that we do need to do better. There is we can work on our processes, and we're making a commitment to doing that. Also noted that there was a lot of good information that came out tonight too, that also assisted us in terms of just creating some greater awareness around what goes into the budget, how it's built, and some of the information that is shared. So hopefully our friend over here with the journal is going to help us with that and getting some information out, because we do want to make sure. And then for those folks that are watching tonight too, is that hopefully this was just as enlightening for you as it was for us. There is commitment that, we will continue to work on our processes, and that we can make these better. One thing that I will say, and I said at the beginning of this meeting as well, is that I have a lot of confidence in this board, a very hardworking board, really committed to asking good questions, hard questions, and working through processes so that we can make this strong. So what I'd like to do now is, Mr. Yeager, I'd like to call for a vote, please.
Peggy Mueller, Aragon.
Yes, with reservations and hopefully changes.
Danielle Gonzalez.
I'm going to vote no. I have the same reservations. I suspect the same reservations. So I'm a no.
Barbara Peterson.
Yes.
Crystal Tapia Romero.
No.
Josefina Dominguez.
Yes.
Courtney Jackson.
No.
And Yolanda Montoya Cordova.
Yes.
So there are 4 yeses and 3 nos.
Thank you. So I'll just move on to the announcement of upcoming board meetings. The next Board of Education meeting will be held on Wednesday, June 15th, 2022 at 5 p.m. in the John Milne Community Boardroom of the Allison Bruce King Educational Complex, 6400 Uptown Boulevard Northeast, or virtually at www.aps.edu. And the next special Board of Education meeting will be held on Wednesday, June 22nd, 2022 at 5:30 p.m. or immediately following the Finance Committee meeting in the John Milne Community Boardroom of the Allison Bruce King Education Complex here at 6400 Uptown Boulevard. And with that, we stand adjourned. That one.
Hallelujah.